My name's Ryan. I'm 29, work in marketing, live alone, and until a few months ago, I still bent over backward trying to be the good son. You know the one, always shows up, always pays, always forgives. The dependable disappointment, the quiet wallet. And honestly, I thought maybe that was enough to earn a seat at the table. Turns out, it wasn't even enough to earn a plate. It started with a message from my mom 2 weeks ago. Family dinner on the 15th. Dress nice, smiley face, just like that. No details. No mention of why we were getting together. No hint that it wasn't just some regular takeout and TV kind of night like they usually did. I figured it might be someone's birthday or a mini reunion, but whatever. After years of being half included, I was just happy to be invited to anything. I responded with a simple sure, looking forward to it, and marked it on my calendar without thinking too hard. The night before, I asked if I could bring anything. No reply. The next morning, I texted again, just confirming the time and place. Still nothing. Finally, around 2 p.m., my sister Emma texted, "Don't stress, just be there at 7. Dress nice." So I did. Suit jacket, slacks, fresh shave, basically the most effort I'd put into a family event since my cousin's wedding 4 years ago. I showed up 15 minutes early to this fancy downtown restaurant, one of those places with dim lighting, tiny water glasses, and waiters who speak in gentle whispers. I walked in, gave the reservation name, Green Party, table for 6, and they led me to a large round table set for 6 people. For a second, I smiled. Maybe this time would be different. Then the hostess frowned. "Actually, sorry, there seems to be a change. The party is over here." She led me across the room, toward a cramped corner next to the kitchen doors. There was a small 2-seater table, with a laminated takeout menu from their bar attached. I blinked. "I think there's a mistake. I'm with the Green Party. 6 people. She tilted her head. "That's what I was told, sir. Your family's over there." She gestured back to the main table, where I now spotted my mom, dad, Emma, my older brother Scott, and his wife, already laughing and sipping wine. For a second, I froze. My first instinct was to assume it was just a mix-up, but then Emma turned, saw me, and smirked. "Oh hey, Ryan," she called over. "We figured you'd probably prefer something simple, so we asked them to give you the takeout menu." Scott leaned back in his chair, his arm lazily thrown around the back of his wife's. "Yeah, didn't think you'd be into the whole real dinner thing." My mother just sipped her drink and said nothing. My stomach dropped. I looked at my dad, hoping maybe someone would say something normal, maybe crack a joke or call it a misunderstanding. He didn't even look at me. Instead, he turned to the waiter and said, "We'll start with the oysters and truffle flatbread, and keep the drinks coming." I stood there like a fool, still holding the little black folder with the reservation confirmation email in my phone. I'd offered to help plan this dinner. I'd helped pay for Scott's wedding. I was the one who covered Emma's car insurance for a year after she lost her job. I've picked up groceries, paid medical deductibles, and quietly slipped cash to my parents when the mortgage got tight. And now I was being given a laminated menu like I was their awkward plus one. I didn't sit. I didn't even walk over to my assigned sad little table. I just stood there for a beat, swallowing a mix of embarrassment and a kind of simmering clarity. You know that cold click in your brain when you realize, oh, this isn't a joke. They meant this. That moment snapped something in me. I turned to the waiter who'd brought me over and said, in a calm voice, "Actually, I made the reservation. I'll be handling the table." His eyes widened slightly. "Oh, understood, sir." I walked past the main table, ignoring Emma's raised eyebrow and Scott's smug little chuckle, and approached the host's stand. "Can you update the billing info on the green reservation?" I asked. She nodded, polite but curious. "Certainly, sir. Who should we?" "Put it on the main parties tab. I'll be leaving soon, so I just want to make sure everything's in order." She hesitated for a second. I pulled up the confirmation email, the one I'd made 2 weeks ago, long before my parents even mentioned dinner, and showed her my name on it. That seemed to seal it. Then I quietly walked outside, sat on a bench just around the corner, and waited. I checked my watch. 10 minutes passed. Then 15. I imagined the appetizers rolling in, the clinking of glasses, the light laughter as they toasted themselves. At the 20-minute mark, my phone buzzed. "Dad, $1,900? What did you order?" I didn't answer. Not right away, anyway. Because for the first time in years, I wasn't scrambling to fix their mess. I wasn't the backup plan. I wasn't the family doormat. I just sat there, letting the sound of a very expensive dinner crash down on them without lifting a single finger. I stared at my phone screen, watching the angry texts pile in one after another. First, it was Dad. He texted, "Seriously? This isn't funny. Fix it now. You made the reservation. You better make this right." Then came one from Emma. "What is wrong with you? You embarrassed us in front of everyone." And Scott, true to form, just sent a thumbs up emoji with classic Ryan. Always gotta be the victim. I should have been angry. I should have been pacing around the block, maybe even second-guessing myself like I always used to. But instead, I leaned back, let the cool night air settle on my face, and just breathed. Calm, measured, free. The thing is, that dinner wasn't the beginning of their cruelty. It was just the first time they did it in public. Growing up, I was the easy one. Emma was the golden child, charming, social, always praised for being so put together. Scott was the classic firstborn, got a full ride to college, and no matter how many jobs he quit or how condescending he was, Mom and Dad still looked at him like he hung the moon. Me? I was the one who should have tried harder, who should have majored in something more useful, who shouldn't make people uncomfortable with my tone. When I landed my job in marketing, they said it sounded kind of soft. When I bought my first car, they joked that it was nice for a starter vehicle. I paid off my student loans in full before either of them, and they still looked at me like I was borrowing air. And yet, I stayed close. I went home every Thanksgiving. I sent birthday gifts, even when they forgot mine. I paid for things I had no business paying for. Why? Because some part of me still believed if I just kept showing up, they'd eventually see me as family. Not just a family member, but theirs. But that night, in that overpriced restaurant, I realized I wasn't just on the outside looking in. I was the glass they were pressing their faces against while laughing. I was the joke, the safety net, the guy who always came through, no matter how little they gave back. So I didn't go back in. I let them eat. And as I sat on that bench, basking in the beautiful disaster I'd quietly set in motion, I decided I was done playing that role. The next morning, I woke up to 7 missed calls. 4 from Dad, 2 from Emma, and 1 from my mom. That one shocked me. She rarely called. I listened to the voicemail, half expecting something dramatic. "Ryan, call me back when you get this." That was, "Look, I know that dinner wasn't ideal, but you didn't have to make a scene. Your father's very upset. We all are. And the restaurant says you were the one who made the reservation. They're saying the charges are final. I don't know why you would do something like this. We were trying to give you space. Anyway, please call me." Trying to give me space. That line actually made me laugh. I didn't call her back. Instead, I spent the day making another kind of reservation at my bank, at my credit card portal, and with every auto payment I'd ever foolishly linked to any of them. Emma's car insurance? Canceled. Scott's Netflix and gym membership I'd been covering without him realizing? Gone. The family phone plan I was still technically the administrator for? Locked and removed my card. And the big one, my parents' home internet, security system, and supplemental health coverage all tied to my account because their credit wasn't strong enough when they signed up years ago. All paused. Not deleted, not sabotaged. Just removed the funding. By that evening, I had a spreadsheet. Nothing dramatic, just a list. A clear breakdown of what I had been paying for. What I had quietly carried. I didn't send it to them. Not yet. I waited. And it didn't take long. The next morning, Dad texted me in all caps. "Why is the internet down? Did you do something to the account?" 5 minutes later, Mom chimed in. She texted, "Ryan, your father's having a meltdown over the Wi-Fi and the cameras. Please fix whatever you did." Then Emma, "Did you cancel my insurance? My card's not working. I got stopped by a cop this morning. I had to show him screenshots." And finally, Scott, who never texts unless it's a demand, he texted, "You messed up the Netflix and the gym? Are you 12? That one I replied to. "I thought you didn't want the soft guy in your life making decisions for you. Just honoring your wishes." The silence after that? Music. By the end of the week, my dad tried calling. 8 times. The last voicemail was surprisingly quiet. "Son, okay. Look, let's just talk. We're not saying you don't have the right to feel upset, but this isn't how family handles problems." It took everything in me not to laugh, because all I could think was, exactly. I had handled it their way for years by swallowing it, by letting the resentment simmer under the surface, by staying quiet while they made digs and jokes and decisions that excluded me. And now that I wasn't doing that anymore, suddenly it was a problem. But I wasn't angry. I was done. That Sunday, I drove past the old family house. Not to go in, not to knock, just to remind myself I didn't belong there anymore. I saw the porch light flickering, something I used to fix every few months when Dad couldn't get the ladder out. The front yard was overgrown, probably waiting for me to show up and mow it. I didn't stop. I just kept driving. Because the best part of all this? They hadn't even realized what else I'd quietly been planning behind the scenes. And when that hits them, well, let's just say that $1,900 dinner might start to feel like a generous discount. 3 days after the dinner fiasco, I got a knock on my apartment door. I wasn't expecting anyone, definitely not at 8:47 on a Wednesday morning when I was still nursing a coffee and debating whether to log into work or just stare at spreadsheets in a state of mild existential dread. I peeked through the peephole, half expecting it to be a neighbor needing help with a package or maybe one of those energy plan sales reps. But no, it was my mom, dressed in business casual, like she'd just come from a PTA meeting, holding a tote bag that said, "Live, laugh, love," and wearing an expression that tried to balance concern with condescension. That tight-lipped look I knew too well, the "I'm only here because I have to be civil" face. I opened the door slowly, bracing myself. "Hi," she said, like we hadn't spoken through a voicemail laced with thinly veiled guilt just days before. "Hi," I replied, flat. She glanced past me into the apartment like she was checking for signs of squalor, or maybe hoping to spot some framed reminder of how much better off I was with them. I didn't invite her in. I thought we could talk. In person. I didn't move from the doorway. About. She blinked, apparently not expecting the lack of warm welcome. About. This whole situation. The dinner. The payments. Your father's been really upset. I nodded. Yeah, that sounds rough. Her mouth twitched. Ryan, don't be like this. You know your father doesn't express things well. He was just trying to make the evening special. By seating me next to the kitchen with a takeout menu? I tilted my head. That was your idea of special? Silence. She adjusted the strap on her shoulder. You've always been sensitive. There it was. The word. Like it was a flaw I hadn't outgrown. As if expecting basic respect made me the emotional one. You know, I said slowly, being sensitive is a lot easier when you're constantly being told you don't belong. She took a deep breath, like she was preparing for a TED Talk. I think what we're struggling with is your need to be the center of attention. You always take things personally. It was just dinner, Ryan. One dinner. That I paid for. That I organized. That I wasn't even invited to properly. That's not fair, she snapped before immediately softening. Look, can't we just move on? Undo whatever you did with the accounts? Fix the mess. I leaned against the doorframe, crossing my arms. You want me to fix the mess? She blinked again. You know what I mean. I do. You mean you want me to go back to covering everything while being treated like an afterthought? That's not what anyone wants. You just made everything so dramatic. I let out a short laugh, not because it was funny, but because it was so predictably tone-deaf I almost admired the consistency. Then I pulled out my phone and opened my receipts folder. Literally. Screenshots. Spreadsheets. Transactions with annotations. I didn't shove it in her face, just held it casually where she could see the sheer volume. I tracked everything. Every dime I've covered in the last 3 years. Emma's insurance. Scott's phone. Your security system. Groceries. Streaming services. Pet insurance for a dog I've never even met. $21,389. Her face paled. You're exaggerating. I can print the reports. She didn't say anything. So let me ask you this, Mom. When you and Dad laughed about putting me at the casual table, when Emma said I wouldn't want to be part of the real dinner, was that part of the plan too? Or just a bonus joke at my expense? Her eyes dropped. I think we've all said things we didn't mean. But you meant to exclude me. She didn't answer that. We stood in silence for a while. Finally, she said, your father wants you to come to dinner on Sunday. A proper one. We'll make your favorite. Lasagna. I asked flatly. She smiled, weakly. Yes. I let the silence linger before answering. I'll think about it. She looked relieved, like that meant I was softening. But I wasn't. Because what she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I'd already contacted the estate lawyer. The family home? The one my name is partially on because I co-signed during the refinance 5 years ago to help them get a lower interest rate? I'd formally initiated the process to relinquish my liability and ownership claim. Which sounds generous, until you realize that without my credit, the bank reevaluates the loan. And given their current financial state, they're either going to have to sell or take on a massively higher monthly payment. And the best part? They have no idea it's coming. Yet. but they will. Because when that letter arrives from the bank, when they realize they're not just losing the financial padding, but the structural support beneath everything, they're going to feel it. And for once, I won't be there to pick up the pieces, but I'll watch. Quietly. Just like they used to watch me eat alone. I didn't go to dinner that Sunday. Instead, I spent the evening making lasagna in my own kitchen, with my favorite music playing, no passive-aggressive comments, and no sudden guilt trips. Just me, a glass of wine, and the comforting realization that I had finally stepped out of the box they'd spent years building around me. The next morning, I received a call from the family's longtime estate attorney, Mr. Callahan, a quiet, professional man in his late 60s who always reminded me of a librarian that had accidentally gotten a law degree. I'd spoken to him 3 times over the past 2 months, arranging everything behind the scenes. The mortgage, the ownership shares, and more importantly, my removal. He was calling to confirm that the formal notice had been delivered that morning. Your parents were both home when the courier dropped it off, he said gently. I expect you'll be hearing from them soon. He wasn't wrong. At 9:17 a.m., the calls began. First, Dad. What is this letter? You're pulling out of the refinance? Are you insane? Do you have any idea what this does to our mortgage? Then a follow-up. Dad, Callahan says we either refinance without your credit or sell. You know damn well we can't get the same rate again. You're going to bankrupt your own family. I didn't reply. At 9:40 a.m., my mom called. Voicemail, Ryan, honey, I don't understand what's going on. This can't be right. We talked about dinner. You said you'd think about it. Why would you blindside us like this? By 10 a.m., Scott joined in. You're seriously pulling this now? Over dinner? You drama queen. Grow up and fix it. Then Emma, okay, you made your point. Enough already. You've humiliated us. We're all suffering, if that makes you feel better. Congrats. Hope you're happy. I didn't respond to them either, because I didn't do any of this to get attention or revenge for revenge's sake. I did it because I had finally come to terms with the fact that they would never see me as an equal, never treat me with respect, never give me a seat at the table unless I built the table, paid for the chairs, and served the food myself. And even then, they'd still hand me a takeout menu. Later that afternoon, I got a knock on my apartment door again. This time, it was Dad. He didn't wait to be invited in. He just barged past me like he owned the place, nostrils flaring. We need to talk. I stayed near the door. We are. He paced like a caged animal. You blindsided us. You blindsided me. After everything I've done for you. I actually laughed. Like what? Mocking me at dinner? Letting Emma and Scott treat me like an afterthought while I paid for half their lives. His jaw clenched. You always play the victim. No, I said calmly. I just finally stopped volunteering for the role. He pointed a finger at me. We're your family. You don't just walk away from family when things get hard. That's rich, I said, folding my arms. You walked away from me emotionally a long time ago. I just finally stopped chasing you. He went quiet then, like the weight of those words hit him in the chest. Look, he said after a long pause, trying a different tone, we're in a bad spot. If this goes through, we'll lose the house. You know that. I do. So you're just going to let that happen? I looked him dead in the eye. I'm not letting anything happen. I'm stepping back. The consequences are just the natural result of what you all built. You're punishing everyone because you didn't like your seat at dinner. I shook my head slowly. No. I'm walking away because after years of giving and giving, you made it clear I'd never be more than convenient. Not loved. Not respected. Just useful. You didn't even see me. He looked away, jaw tightening. Then he muttered, we didn't think you'd care. And there it was. The truth. I didn't say anything after that. I didn't need to. He stood there a moment longer, like he wanted to fight, like he was waiting for me to break, to fold, to do what I always did, apologize, smooth things over, make it easier for them. But I didn't. Eventually, he turned and left without another word. A week passed. The house went up for sale. A real estate sign appeared in their perfectly manicured yard, one I used to mow for free every summer when I still thought that meant something. They tried to make it look voluntary, told relatives they were downsizing, but everyone in the family chat knew. Word spreads fast when 3 adult children are suddenly looking for backup loans and couch space. Emma posted some cryptic Instagram story about betrayal by those closest to you, followed by a picture of her car with a parking boot because she hadn't renewed her insurance yet. Scott started a GoFundMe with a sob story about financial hardship. It raised $80 from 2 coworkers and his high school gym teacher. Mom emailed me once. Just a link to an old photo album, one of us from a beach trip years ago. I didn't open it. Because here's the thing. I didn't need memories to remind me what I'd lost. I needed to protect the peace I had finally earned. 3 months later, the house sold. They moved into a smaller rental on the edge of town. Emma had to pick up extra shifts. Scott got his gym membership canceled and started jogging in public parks, which he whined about daily online. Mom and Dad stopped calling. And me? I went to Italy. It wasn't planned, just a sudden burst of spontaneity. I'd saved for it over the years, always telling myself it wasn't the right time. But when I saw the sold listing for the house pop up on Zillow, I booked the ticket the same night. I sat in Florence, watching the sun bleed gold over the Arno River, sipping espresso, and breathing, really breathing, for the first time in my adult life. No debt tied to other people. No emotional chain around my ankle. Just freedom. Pure, earned freedom. One night, as I watched the city lights flicker on, I got a message from a number I hadn't saved but recognized instantly. Mom texted, "I hope you're okay. We're all struggling. Dad hasn't been the same. We miss you." I stared at it for a long time. Then I wrote one word, "Goodbye." I blocked the number. Not out of hate. Not even out of spite. But because I knew if I left the door open, even an inch, they'd wedge themselves back in. With guilt. With shame. With half apologies and full expectations. And I was done with that. They taught me what family shouldn't look like. And I learned, finally, how to build one of my own, brick by brick, boundary by boundary. One that doesn't ask me to sit by the kitchen doors while they toast each other over appetizers I paid for. One that starts with me and ends with peace. My name's Mark, I'm 32, and until recently, I thought I knew what family meant. I thought being the eldest came with certain unspoken duties, support, protection, sacrifice. I believed that if you gave enough, people would eventually see your value. Turns out, I was wrong. It started last spring when my younger brother, Kyle, got engaged. He's 27, charismatic, loud, the kind of guy who turns every sentence into a punchline. He's always been Mom's favorite and Dad's mini-me, the golden child. Meanwhile, I've been the responsible one, the one who stayed close to home, paid off my student loans, helped my parents with their mortgage when Dad got laid off. Quietly dependable, never flashy, rarely thanked. When Kyle got engaged to his college sweetheart, Lauren, I was genuinely happy for him. I congratulated him, gave him a bear hug, even offered to take him out for drinks to celebrate. We'd grown a bit distant in recent years, mostly because he seemed to think adulting was optional, but I still remembered teaching him how to ride a bike, sneaking him snacks after bedtime, covering for him when he crashed Dad's car in high school. Family is family, right? 2 weeks after the engagement, Mom called me sounding frantic. "Mark, honey, Kyle needs help. The wedding's going to be expensive and Lauren's parents are already stretched thin." I didn't even hesitate. I had some money saved up. I was planning to buy a new car, but I figured I could wait. "How much are we talking?" I asked. That's how I ended up wiring over $12,000 to a joint account my mom had set up for the wedding expenses. It was supposed to cover catering, the venue deposit, and the DJ. She promised they'd invite me to the planning meetings so I could stay in the loop. That never happened. A month passed, then another. Every time I asked about the wedding, the date kept shifting. "We're still finalizing things," Lauren would say with a tight smile. "You know how vendors are." Eventually, Kyle sent a group text. "Save the date, July 14th. We can't wait to celebrate with you all." Except, I never got an invitation. Everyone else in the family did. Cousins, second cousins, even my aunt's new boyfriend. But me? Nothing. At first, I thought it was a mistake. I waited, checked the mail every day. I even texted Kyle, "Hey man, I think my invite got lost in the mail." No response. 2 days later, I got a call from our cousin Jenna. "Mark, are you not coming to the wedding?" she asked, her voice laced with hesitation. "I wasn't invited," I said, trying to keep my voice light. She paused. "Call told us you were too busy with work." That was a lie. I hadn't mentioned work to anyone. I was already clearing my schedule just in case. Something felt off. So, I drove to my parents' house that weekend. I waited until Sunday morning, when Kyle was supposed to stop by to pick up some old childhood photos for the wedding slideshow. Mom opened the door, and the look on her face when she saw me said everything. "Oh, Mark, you should have called. Thought I'd surprise you," I said. "Kyle here." Before she could stop me, Kyle walked into the room holding a shoebox of pictures. He looked up and groaned, like I was a mess he forgot to clean up. I was wondering when you'd show up, he said. Am I not invited to your wedding? I asked, eyes locked on him. He didn't even flinch, just rolled his eyes and muttered, You? At my wedding? You just embarrass me like always. Embarrass him? I stood there, stunned. I paid for the damn thing. Embarrass him? What does that even mean? I asked. He smirked. You're just so stiff. You'd make everyone uncomfortable. Lauren agrees. We want the day to be fun, drama-free. I turned to Mom. You knew. She wouldn't meet my eyes. Cal made the call. Honey, it's his day. Don't ruin it. Dad stepped in from the kitchen with a mug of coffee and said nothing. Just nodded like this was all normal. My blood ran cold. I wanted to scream. I wanted to punch a hole through the wall. Instead, I laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was the only thing keeping me from breaking down. Right? I said. Don't want to make things uncomfortable. I left without another word. Got in my car. Drove home in silence. Every mile stretched like a rubber band ready to snap. I sat in my apartment, staring at the wedding text on my phone, scrolling through family group chats where everyone was gushing about the decor, the location, the food tasting Lauren posted on Instagram, food I paid for. And that's when something shifted in me. I opened my laptop and pulled up the bank transfer receipts. Every vendor I helped pay for had my name on the agreement. Every single one. I had the contracts, the emails, even some of the invoices forwarded from Mom's account when she forgot to change the billing address. It hit me all at once. I wasn't just cut out. I was used. Like a walking wallet. Forgotten the moment they cashed the check. And they expected me to just sit back and take it. I didn't sleep that night. My mind was racing, but not with sadness anymore. No, I was planning. The venue was the first call. Then the caterer. Then the DJ. Each one of them was polite at first, until I mentioned the name on the contract. Mine. When I asked about cancellation policies and refund timelines, things got very, very quiet. By the time I reached out to the photography team, my hands were steady, cold, like I was performing surgery. I didn't cancel anything just yet. I wanted to see how far they'd go, how much they'd flaunt my generosity without acknowledging it. 3 days before the wedding, I got a text from Lauren. It was the first time she'd ever messaged me directly. Hey Mark, Kyle said you might be coming after all? We just wanted to check for seating purposes. Seating purposes. Not an apology. Not an explanation. That's when I knew. They weren't sorry. They just wanted to keep using me until the last table was cleared. I stared at that message, thumbs hovering over the keyboard. I didn't respond to Lauren's message. Not with words, anyway. Instead, I opened a folder I'd quietly compiled over the past 72 hours. Contracts, bank transfers, email confirmations, all neatly labeled with names, amounts, and cancellation clauses. My lawyer friend Natalie had helped me draft a formal notice. As the financial party of record for the following services, you get the idea. But I didn't send it yet. I was waiting, watching, measuring just how deep their entitlement ran. And they didn't disappoint. The day before the wedding, my phone buzzed with a flood of Instagram stories. Lauren twirling in her dress at the final fitting. Kyle doing shots with the groomsmen. Mom smiling beside a champagne tower. They even posted a countdown, 24 hours until forever. They had no idea the caterer had already emailed me confirming the refund, minus a small cancellation fee. The DJ was even more polite. Said he'd had a feeling something weird was going on when Kyle tried to change the name on the booking and couldn't. Venue? Oh, they were the best. Said they dealt with this kind of thing before and understood completely. Full refund, pending written confirmation. And then came the rehearsal dinner. I wasn't invited, obviously, but my cousin Jenna, bless her, sent me a blurry video from under the table. Kyle stood up at the head of a long, candlelit dinner and toasted everyone. Thanks to all of you who made this happen, he said, raising his glass. This wedding is going to be unforgettable. Especially since we kept it, drama-free. Laughter. Then Lauren chimed in. No negativity. Just love, family, and friends. They clinked glasses. My mom leaned into the camera's edge and smiled like she was in a Hallmark movie. I watched the video twice. Not out of pain, not out of jealousy, but to make sure I hadn't imagined the smugness, the complete and total erasure of me, the person who funded the unforgettable celebration they were toasting. That was my green light. I waited until 2 a.m. Then, one by one, I sent the notices. Vendor, venue, DJ, florist, photographer. I attached the contracts, the cancellation clauses, the refunds requests, and a simple statement: I am withdrawing all financial and contractual support for the event scheduled on July 14th. As the paying client, I am exercising my right to cancel these services effective immediately. Then I went to sleep, and I slept like a baby. I woke up at 9:12 to 17 missed calls. First from Kyle, then Lauren, then Mom's cell, then Dad, then an unknown number that turned out to be the venue coordinator. And then silence. I didn't answer a single one. I just made myself a cup of coffee, put on my favorite hoodie, and scrolled through Instagram like it was a Sunday morning comedy special. At 10:07, Jenna sent me a message. Mark, what did you do? Attached was a photo she screen capped from Lauren's Instagram before it vanished, an empty ballroom with a caption that had since been deleted due to unforeseen circumstances. Apparently, Kyle and Lauren showed up at the venue with their families at 9:30 a.m. sharp, but the doors were locked. No catering trucks. No florists. The chairs hadn't been delivered. The planner was gone. The venue staff refused to let them in, citing a canceled booking. The deposit had been returned to the cardholder, me less a $350 fee, which I considered a small price for poetic justice. The guests? Dozens of them, all standing around in heels and suits in the hot July sun, confused, checking their phones, wondering if they had the wrong address. It gets better. The photographer posted an available today story at noon. The DJ updated his bio to now accepting last-minute bookings. And several guests, ones who hadn't even known I existed a week ago, started posting stories and comments like, WTF happened to Kyle's wedding, and all dressed up and nowhere to go. Lauren's maid of honor posted a selfie with the caption, well, this is awkward. You could see the empty dance floor behind her. By evening, my mom left me a voicemail. Her voice was tight, controlled, like she was trying not to scream. Mark, I don't know what you think you've accomplished, but you've humiliated this family. Call me back. Now. Then Kyle texted, you just couldn't let me have one thing, huh? Always bitter. Always jealous. You ruined the best day of my life. And still, not one apology. Not one word acknowledging what they did. No remorse. Just blame. So I sent one reply. Not to Kyle. Not to Mom. Not to anyone screaming into the void. I posted on my own Instagram, an account I rarely use, a screenshot of the $12,443 refund to my bank account, with the caption, wasn't invited, but still paid the bill. So I left early. No tags. No names. Just enough breadcrumbs. And the comments rolled in. Family I hadn't spoken to in years messaged me. Old friends from college. Coworkers. Even Lauren's cousin, who I'd only met once, sent a thumbs-up emoji followed by, I knew something was off about them. That night, I sat on my couch, Netflix paused in the background, phone buzzing every few minutes, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel invisible. I felt free. And that's not even the end. Because the real fallout didn't hit until the next morning, when Kyle and Lauren tried to rebook everything last minute, and realized how many vendors had blacklisted them permanently. The morning after the non-wedding, I turned off my phone for a few hours. Not to avoid the chaos, no, I was savoring it. I didn't need to be told what was happening to know exactly how things were unraveling. I could picture it all, Lauren sobbing, her mascara running down her cheeks in full view of disappointed guests, Kyle pacing, red in the face, barking at vendors through clenched teeth, Mom probably trying to take charge like she always does, only this time. No one answering her calls. The image alone was more satisfying than any apology they could have faked. When I finally turned my phone back on, I had 52 new messages. Some angry, some desperate, a few, surprisingly, sympathetic. Most were from Lauren, flipping back and forth between passive-aggressive guilt trips and full-on tantrums. You've ruined our lives. We can't even rebook. Everyone's refusing to work with us now. How dare you ambush your own brother's wedding? This was supposed to be our day. You're so petty. You always have been. Please call me. We just want to understand why. I didn't answer any of them. Instead, I opened a message from Jenna. She had filmed another video, this time of the emergency reception that Kyle and Lauren scrambled together last minute. It was in someone's backyard, with a half-collapsed tent and folding chairs from a church hall. There was no DJ, just a speaker system playing a choppy Spotify playlist that kept buffering mid-song. The catering consisted of takeout trays from a local pizza joint and a cooler filled with soda. In the video, Lauren looked livid. Her once flawless updo had started to unravel, and her designer heels were digging into the grass. Kyle tried to smile, clinking glasses with a small group of guests, but his eyes kept darting around, as if waiting for something or someone to save the moment. But no one came. At one point in the video, Kyle pulled Jenna aside. He clearly didn't know she was recording. "She set this up, didn't she?" he hissed. "She said she wanted a wedding no one would forget." "Well, congrats. Everyone's gonna remember this for the wrong reason." Jenna, bless her chaotic heart, just sipped her soda and said, "Actually, I think this is exactly what you deserved." She ended the clip with a wink. After watching that, I finally responded to her message. "Pizza and lawn chairs? I almost feel bad." Almost. Her reply was immediate. "They're calling it the recovery reception." Lauren tried to spin it as quirky, wholesome, and spontaneous. Meanwhile, half the guests left after 15 minutes. Then she added, "I'm just glad someone finally stood up to them. I've watched them walk all over you for years, Mark. You deserved better." That message meant more than I expected. I didn't realize how much I needed to hear someone say it, that I wasn't crazy, that I wasn't overreacting, that this wasn't just some petty sibling rivalry. This was a pattern. A long, exhausting pattern of being dismissed, used, and shoved aside the moment I stopped being useful. I kept scrolling through the fallout. One of Kyle's groomsmen posted a group photo captioned, "The wedding that wasn't," followed by laughing emojis. Someone else in the comments asked what happened, and another guest straight up replied, "Apparently the guy who paid for everything got snubbed, so he pulled the plug." The comment had over 400 likes. Later that evening, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. I let it go to voicemail. When I played it back, it was Lauren's father. His tone was low, measured, embarrassed. "Mark, this is Steven, Lauren's dad. I wanted to apologize. I had no idea you weren't invited. If I'd known, I would have said something. I just assumed, since you were footing the bill. I mean, I'm sorry. For all of it." There was a pause. "Look, if you ever need a recommendation or help with anything, I own 2 restaurants in the city. Just let me know." You didn't deserve that. That was the only apology I received. Not from Kyle. Not from Lauren. Not from my parents. Especially not from my mom. Her first real attempt at reaching me came 2 days later, with a text that simply read, "We need to talk. This has gone too far." Gone too far? As if I was the one who started it. I stared at the message for a long time, rereading it until the words lost meaning. Then I did something I hadn't planned to do until much later. I logged into the family's shared cloud drive, the one I'd been managing for years. The one where I stored every scan bill, every spreadsheet I'd made to keep track of who owed what when Dad was out of work, when Kyle wrecked the Toyota, when Mom's medical bills started piling up. I opened the file labeled Family Budget 2022, and I deleted it. All of it. Not because I was being petty, but because I was done. Done carrying the weight of a family that only remembered me when it was convenient. Done pretending that love and loyalty were one-sided debts I owed. That night, I ordered Thai food, turned on a documentary, and let the silence settle in around me. It was peaceful, like shedding a second skin. But even then, even with the wedding ruined and the mask ripped off, the fallout wasn't over. Because Kyle's next move? That was the one that made this personal in a way I never expected. And when it happened, I realized this wasn't just about the wedding anymore. It was about everything they thought they could still take. Everything I still had to protect. It happened 3 days after the wedding. I'd just gotten off a call with a client. I work in finance, mostly advising small businesses on how to stay afloat during inflation, when I heard a loud thud at my front door. I wasn't expecting a delivery, but when I opened it, there was a large manila envelope duct taped to the handle. No postage. No return address. I peeled it off, opened it slowly, and found a letter. Typed. Cold. Legalese wrapped in just enough pettiness to stink of desperation. It was from Kyle. Or more accurately, from the attorney he must have found through a Facebook ad. The letter accused me of willfully sabotaging a contracted event, demanded restitution for emotional damages, and, laughably, claimed I owed them compensation for humiliation endured and irreparable harm to public image. Public image? Kyle sold cars at a dealership with a 2.8-star rating. The best part? The letter also stated that I had no legal right to interfere in a family matter once funds were gifted. Gifted? As if I handed them 12 grand in a birthday card and said, "Do what you want." I laughed. A real, guttural laugh. Because the man who stole my seat at the wedding table was now trying to strong-arm me through a boilerplate cease and desist template downloaded from a discount lawyer site. I forwarded it to Natalie, my lawyer friend. She called me within minutes, laughing harder than I did. Tell Kyle I said thanks, she said, still chuckling. I needed a break from the merger case. This is basically legal origami. She helped me draft a reply. A real one, not a bluff. It included every invoice I'd paid, every signed contract listing me as the financial party, every vendor's cancellation policy, and every line that clearly defined client rights. I even added the tax documents, because yes, I reported it as a business expense. And then, we ended it with a paragraph so cold it could have frosted a window. Any further contact made with malicious intent or attempts to defame my character will be pursued through actual legal channels. Kindly remember that courtroom proceedings require evidence, which I have, in spades. I printed the letter, stapled the packet, and hand-delivered it to Kyle's front porch, where the remnants of their recovery reception still sat in garbage bags. I placed it gently next to a deflated balloon that read, Mr. and Mrs. I didn't hear from him for a week. And then, the implosion. Apparently, Lauren's family had started asking questions. Real ones. Her dad had called a vendor, just for clarification, and found out that not only had I funded the wedding, but Lauren and Kyle had tried, unsuccessfully, to reroute contracts in their own names after my cancellation. The caterer mentioned the word fraud. The florist used the phrase blacklisted permanently. Lauren's dad exploded. Publicly. At a family barbecue, no less. Word got back to me through Jenna that he'd stood up in front of 20 people, waved the invoice from the florist, and said, so this is the son-in-law I'm stuck with. A liar who can't even pay for his own wedding. Lauren was apparently in tears. Kyle stormed off. And Lauren's dad? He pulled his promised investment from Kyle's dream project, a used car lot he'd been trying to co-open with his college buddy. The deal collapsed. Loan denied. Credit took a hit. Suddenly, the guy who said I'd embarrass him had no business, no wedding, and no backup plan. But here's where it gets truly poetic. A few weeks later, my parents invited me to dinner. Not together, that would have been too obvious. Separately. Mom called first, her voice trying to sound light, like we were just picking up where we left off. Mark, sweetheart, it's been too long. Your father and I, well, we were thinking maybe we could all sit down. Talk things through. As a family. I agreed. Not because I wanted to patch things up, but because I wanted to hear them say it. Out loud. We met at their favorite Italian place, the same one they took Kyle to after his high school graduation. I showed up early, ordered a water, and waited. When they walked in, I could feel the tension in Mom's smile. The way she sat down told me everything, rehearsed, careful, anxious. Dad didn't even look me in the eye. He just picked up a breadstick and stared at the tablecloth. So, I said, this is about Kyle, isn't it? Mom's smile faltered. It's about us, Mark. No, I said calmly. It's about Kyle, and how you let him walk all over me. Again. She looked down, suddenly interested in the sugar packets on the table. He made a mistake. No, I corrected. He made a choice. A choice to exclude me. A choice to lie. A choice to use me, then toss me out like trash. And you helped him do it. Dad finally spoke. We didn't know he hadn't invited you until it was too late. That's not true, I said. You told me not to ruin his day. You sided with him. Like you always do. There was a long silence. Then Mom whispered, we didn't think you'd take it so, personally. I almost laughed. Personally? I leaned forward. You didn't just cut me out of the wedding. You cut me out of the family. And now that it blew up in your face, you want to talk things through. But only because Kyle's spiraling and you need someone to bail him out. Again. Mom blinked fast. Dad's jaw tensed. I stood up, tossed a 20 on the table. My half of the untouched pasta. We're done, I said. I'm not your backup plan anymore. And I left. That was 6 months ago. Since then, a lot's changed. I moved out of the city, started working with a nonprofit that helps low-income families get financial literacy education. Bought myself the car I was saving for before Kyle's wedding drained me. It's nothing flashy, but every time I sit behind the wheel, I remember one thing. It's mine. Paid for with my own hands. Earned. Kyle tried texting me once after that. Just one line. We all make mistakes, man. Can't we move on? I didn't respond. Because this wasn't just a mistake. It was a message. Loud and clear. They saw me as a resource. A wallet. A fallback. But not anymore. Now? I wake up every morning with peace in my chest. And silence in my phone. No more missed calls. No more begging. No more guilt-tripping disguised as family meetings. Just freedom. The wedding didn't happen. But the awakening? Oh, it did. and I wouldn't trade that for all the invitations in the world. I'm Nate, 32, and up until this year, I thought my family was dysfunctional in the we fight on holidays but hug it out by dessert kind of way. Turns out, I had no idea just how deep the entitlement ran. Not until Thanksgiving turned into a loyalty test I never signed up for. Let me rewind. A few years ago, my grandfather, the only person in the family who actually saw me as more than a walking ATM, passed away. He built a successful small business in construction, and when he sold it before retiring, he made a decent chunk of money. Everyone assumed he'd split his estate evenly. But to everyone's surprise, especially my mother's, he left almost everything to me. Not because I was his favorite, though she always said that like it was a crime. He told me himself, shortly before he passed, that I was the only one who ever listened to him. The only one who didn't ask him for money, just his time. That meant something to him. My mom was furious. My brother, Tyler, was devastated, and my sister Megan tried to hide her disappointment but couldn't stop herself from muttering figures at the reading of the will. I stayed quiet. I wasn't about to argue over a man's final wishes after he was gone, especially not with people who'd treated him like a piggy bank while he was still breathing. Over the next few months, I offered to help out in small ways, paid off a few minor medical bills, covered a surprise car repair, sent flowers on birthdays. Nothing flashy. I didn't want anyone thinking I was trying to buy affection. But somehow, that just made it worse. Tyler's always had big ideas. When we were kids, he wanted to be a movie director, then a pro gamer, then a restaurateur. Now, at 29, his latest dream was to launch a clothing line for spiritual entrepreneurs. Whatever that meant. I tried to support him emotionally. I listened, I asked questions, even helped him design a website. But when he asked me to invest $150,000 to get it off the ground, I told him gently that I couldn't fund something that unstable. That's when the storm started brewing. The weeks leading up to Thanksgiving were tense. Mom started dropping hints, little guilt trips about how family supports family, and money means nothing if you can't use it to lift others up. Megan, who'd married into money herself, was less subtle. If I got that kind of inheritance, I wouldn't be hoarding it like smog on a pile of gold. It wasn't funny the first time, and by the fifth, it was just grating. I knew what was coming, but I hoped foolishly that they'd drop it. Thanksgiving was held at my parents' house like always. A big colonial-style place that had been in the family since before I was born. When I pulled up, I already had that familiar knot in my stomach. I hadn't even made it through the front door before Tyler came up to me, arms wide, grinning like we were best friends. "Big bro," he shouted. "Ready to talk business?" I gave him a polite nod and moved past him. I could already smell the tension mixed in with the stuffing. Dinner started off civil, more or less. Megan bragged about her recent trip to Santorini. Tyler gave a half-hour speech about how spiritual branding was the next big wave in consciousness. I tried to tune it out and focus on my plate. But it didn't take long before the real agenda revealed itself. "So," Mom said suddenly, her voice cutting through the clatter of cutlery, "Tyler's been working so hard lately. Really chasing his vision. It's so inspiring." I kept chewing. Tyler puffed his chest. "And you know," she continued, louder this time, "with just a little help, his business could really take off." I didn't say anything. Megan jumped in. "Honestly, Nate, you could change his life. One transfer, and boom, our brother's a founder. A visionary. More like a leech," I muttered under my breath. Mom caught it. Her jaw tensed. "Excuse me," she asked, her fork clinking sharply against her plate. I looked up. Calm. Steady. "I've said no. Multiple times." Tyler scoffed. "What, you think you earned that money? You got lucky. You sat around and Grandpa dropped it in your lap." "That's enough," I said firmly. But Mom wasn't done. She stood up, literally stood up at the table, and looked around like she was delivering a monologue. "You're either with this family, or you're against us." The room went quiet. I blinked. I was so stunned, I almost laughed. Almost. Instead, I wiped my mouth with a napkin, folded it neatly beside my plate, and stood up. "Got it," I said. Tyler grinned. "So you'll wire it?" I didn't answer. Just grabbed my keys from the side table, nodded to the one cousin who hadn't said a word all night, and walked out. I didn't slam the door. I didn't say anything dramatic. But in that silence, something in me snapped. I sat in my car for a few minutes, heart pounding. Not with anger. With clarity. I had spent years trying to be the peacekeeper, the provider, the one who never made waves. But that night, I realized I wasn't part of a family. I was part of a system. A system where my worth was directly tied to my bank balance. Where saying no made me an enemy. Where the people who were supposed to love me couldn't see past what they thought I owed them. So I opened my laptop the minute I got home. Logged into every account I shared with them, accounts I'd helped set up, co-signed for, or just temporarily added my name to so they could qualify. Mortgage assistance? Gone. Credit lines I helped extend through my credit? Closed. Business account for Tyler's LLC that I'd co-signed to help him apply for a grant? Disabled. All it took was one email. Not even a phone call. Just a polite, professional message to the bank, withdrawing my support and authorization. I went to bed early that night. Slept better than I had in months. By the time I woke up the next morning, around 7:30, coffee half-brewed, my phone was vibrating off the kitchen counter like it was possessed. 27 missed calls. 11 voicemails. For new emails marked urgent in the subject line. And that was just from Tyler. I scrolled, slowly, watching the meltdown unfold in real time. Megan had texted, "What did you do?" My mom had left a voicemail that started off calm, measured, and then spiraled into the kind of unhinged rant you only hear from someone watching their house of cards collapse. I ignored it all. Instead, I opened the banking app and stared at the pending requests folder. They'd already tried to re-enable the business account. Tyler had submitted a form claiming the shutdown was an error. I flagged it. Declined. Megan had tried to reopen a line of credit she assumed was still tied to my score. Declined. The mortgage account I'd once co-signed on back when Dad had a health scare and needed help refinancing was frozen, and without my authorization, it wasn't going anywhere. That's when I got the call from my aunt, Lana. Now, Lana was always the more grounded one, the only extended relative who didn't treat me like a vending machine. She didn't beat around the bush. "Nate," she said, "what is happening? Your mom just called crying, saying you've destroyed everything." I took a breath. I didn't destroy anything. I just stopped holding up the walls while they kept hitting me with bricks. She was quiet for a beat. Then she said, "I've never seen her this frantic. You might want to brace yourself." And no, she wasn't kidding. That afternoon, I was summoned, and yes, that's the word they used, to a family emergency meeting at my parents' house. The same house where less than 24 hours earlier I'd been told to choose a side. The gall of it. I almost didn't go. Part of me wanted to let them stew in the consequences. But another part, the part that spent too many years hoping they'd finally see me as more than a checkbook, wanted closure. When I walked in, the living room was packed. Mom, Dad, Tyler, Megan, even my cousin Josh, who usually avoids drama like the plague, was there, arms crossed, eyes darting between people like he was watching a courtroom scene unfold. Mom stood up immediately. "Nate, sit. We need to talk." I stayed standing. She launched in without waiting. "Do you have any idea what you've done? The mortgage is frozen. The business account, Tyler can't even pay his supplier. Megan's card is declining at every store." "I'm aware," I said flatly. Tyler jumped in. "This is sabotage. You tanked everything over what? One disagreement? You're ruining your own family." I looked at him, slowly. I said no. "You all said that meant I was against you. So I acted accordingly." Megan rolled her eyes. "You're being petty. You think Grandpa left you that money so you could punish us?" "No," I said, my voice calm but firm. "He left it to me because he knew this day would come. Because he saw how you all treated him. Used him. Just like you've used me." Dad finally spoke. "Son, we're family. We don't always say the right things, but we stick together. We help each other." "And where was that help?" I said, "when I was drowning in debt after college and too proud to ask? Where was it when I skipped meals to pay rent because Tyler maxed out the card I co-signed on? Where was it when Grandpa passed and you all acted like I'd stolen something from you?" The silence in the room was deafening. For a brief second, I thought I saw something like shame flicker across my mother's face, but it vanished quickly. "You're overreacting," she snapped. "It's just money." "No," I replied. "It's never just money to you. It's leverage. It's a reason to guilt, manipulate, and control. And I'm done letting you." Tyler stood, pacing now. "You think this makes you better than us? You're not some saint, Nate. You're selfish. Grandpa wouldn't have wanted this." I smiled bitterly. "He told me, actually, that if you ever came for me the way you went after him, to walk away. To protect what's mine. That man saw what was coming before any of us did." Mom's voice cracked. "We're your family." "No," I said, grabbing my jacket. "You're a group of people I share DNA with. Family? That's earned." And then I left. But it wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The next morning, an anonymous Reddit account with exactly one post made a thread titled, "How do I deal with a greedy sibling who froze our family's finances out of spite?" It started gaining traction. Someone, "Gee, I wonder who," was trying to paint me as some cold-hearted villain on the internet. The comments were split. Some called me a fool. Others saw through the narrative. I ignored it. Mostly. Until someone DM'd me screenshots of a group text between Megan, Tyler, and a few of their friends. In it, they were planning to ambush me at my work, of all places. Megan had even joked, "Let's see how the boss reacts when we show up and tell them who they really hired." That's when I realized the lines had been crossed. Not just crossed, bulldozed. They weren't just angry anymore. They were retaliating. And what they didn't know was that I'd already been documenting everything. I spent the next 2 days in a strange limbo, calm on the outside, but wired like I was sitting on a live wire. I went to work, kept my head down, acted normal. But every time my phone lit up or someone knocked on my office door, I half expected Tyler to come bursting in with a fake sob story, or Megan to show up with some dramatic scene meant to get me fired or embarrassed. I wasn't paranoid. I knew these people. I grew up with them. I knew how they operated when their backs were against the wall. They didn't reflect. They retaliated. And sure enough, it didn't take long. On Thursday morning, I arrived at my office to find my assistant, Casey, waiting by the front desk with an awkward look on her face. "Hey, just a heads up," she said, shifting her weight nervously. "There were 2 people here earlier asking for you, a woman and a guy. Said they were family. I told them you were in a meeting, and they got kind of weird." I closed my eyes and sighed. What did they do? They didn't yell or anything, but they started asking questions about your salary, whether the company ran background checks, stuff like that. Then they left when I said I was calling security. I nodded slowly. "Thanks, Casey. If they come back, call building management. And record it if you can." She gave me a sympathetic look. "Are you okay?" I hesitated. "I'm not sure yet." After she walked off, I sat in my office with the door closed and stared at the blank document on my laptop. I'd already drafted a timeline of events, something I started the night of Thanksgiving after that first string of voicemails came in. Dates, names, amounts, screenshots of text messages, bank records, even audio clips, because Grandpa, God bless him, had been paranoid in his own right and always said, "Record the conversations that matter, just in case the day comes when people rewrite history." Turns out he was right. That day had come. The Reddit post was still active, by the way. By now it had over 300 comments, and whoever had written it, Tyler, I was sure, was replying to almost everyone like some poor, misunderstood victim of financial cruelty. It was absurd. He even claimed I'd threatened him physically. I didn't even dignify it with a response. But I did do something else. I called my lawyer. Not the family lawyer. Not the firm that handled the estate. My own. Someone I'd quietly retained after the inheritance came through, just in case things ever got messy. His name was Mark, mid-40s, all suits and salt and pepper calm. I laid everything out for him, the attempted ambush at my job, the Reddit post, the weaponized sob stories. I forwarded screenshots, call logs, and a few emails with very unsubtle threats buried under passive-aggressive pleasantries. Mark listened patiently. Then he said, "How far are you willing to go?" And that was the moment I realized I was done playing defense. "All the way," I said. "I want them to stop. And if that means blowing up every lie they've ever told about me, so be it." He nodded. "We'll start with a cease and desist. Then we'll go after the slander. And if they keep poking, we pull the receipts. I assume you have those." "Oh," I said, clicking open the folder on my desktop. "I've got receipts in color-coded folders with timestamps, backup drives, and cloud redundancy." He chuckled. "You'd be surprised how rare that is." "No," I said. "I wouldn't." That same afternoon, Tyler emailed me directly, no subject line, just a single sentence, "If you don't fix this, I swear you'll regret it." I didn't reply. Instead, Mark sent him and Megan both a cease and desist letter, citing harassment, attempted defamation, and interference with my employment. A copy went to my parents, too, with language carefully crafted to be polite but crystal clear. Any further attempts to harass, defame, or financially manipulate our client will result in legal escalation. The fallout? Immediate. Tyler went radio silent. Megan called me 10 times in an hour, then texted, "What happened to family?" And then came the kicker, Mom. She showed up. At my apartment. I didn't even know she knew where I lived, but she was there, at my door, and her pearls, and that too-strong perfume she wore to every important moment, like it was armor. I opened the door a crack. She tried to push past me, but I stood firm. "Nathaniel," she said, voice trembling with rage and wounded pride. "What have you done to us?" "To you," I repeated, staring at her. "You mean, what have you done to me?" "For years. For decades." She shook her head like I was the one being irrational. "We're family." "No," I said, my voice low. "You're a group of people who use love as a bargaining chip and loyalty as a leash." I cut the leash. "I didn't raise you to be this cruel." "No, you raised me to be useful. But the bank is closed." Her face twisted. "So that's it? You're just walking away? After everything we've done for you?" I blinked. "Everything I've done for you? You mean?" "Because I don't recall asking you to co-sign loans you defaulted on. I don't remember begging you to put my name on your credit cards. But I do remember paying off your debts, cleaning up Tyler's messes, and being the only one who visited Grandpa when he was dying." She didn't say anything, just stared. Then, without a word, she turned and walked down the hall, heels echoing on the tile. I closed the door behind her. I waited. After that hallway confrontation with my mother, I knew something else was coming. Not immediately, but soon. People like her, like all of them, don't stop because they see the damage they've caused. They stop when the damage circles back around and hits them. And true to form, it only took 5 days. It started with an email from a local journalist. Subject line: request for comment on family dispute. I remember staring at it, heart sinking as I read. "Hi Nathaniel. I'm reaching out in connection with a story being pitched by Tyler and Megan, last name, regarding allegations of financial abuse and family inheritance misconduct. They claim you've used your late grandfather's estate to deliberately sabotage their business and livelihood, and are seeking a feature in our local entrepreneurs column. We'd like to give you an opportunity to respond." It was absurd, but it was also dangerous. Because even though their accusations were laughable to anyone who knew me, in a digital age, optics matter. Reputation matters. And if they painted me as the spoiled heir villain in a sob story, especially in a piece with even a hint of credibility, my career could take a hit. My name could be tainted. That's when I understood something chilling. They weren't just trying to get their money back. They wanted to ruin me. That same day, Mark, my lawyer, got the message too. I forwarded him everything. He called me 30 minutes later with the same controlled intensity he used when we first drafted the cease and desist. "They're pushing it," he said. "Hard. You ready to push back?" I didn't hesitate. "Yes." The next week was a blur of preparation. Mark and I assembled every file, every screenshot, every bank transaction, and even an old voicemail from Grandpa. One where he explicitly stated he was leaving me the bulk of his estate because I was the only one who hadn't exploited him. We also uncovered something I had completely forgotten. A legal document from 3 years prior that Tyler had signed, waiving any claim to future support from Grandpa in exchange for a one-time $40,000 gift. It was airtight. His signature, witnessed, dated, and filed. And Megan? Well, turns out she wasn't quite the victim she pretended to be either. She'd received bridal support from Grandpa, $25,000 toward her wedding, and there was a thank you note to prove it. The hypocrisy was jaw-dropping. We didn't just send a rebuttal to the journalist. We sent everything. Mark's letter was a masterclass in professionalism, lined with subtle fire. Our client would be happy to speak on the record, provided that any story published contains an accurate representation of events and does not perpetuate unfounded claims which may constitute defamation. The journalist never replied. But 3 days later, Tyler's Reddit post mysteriously vanished. So did his Instagram, where he'd been posting dramatic healing through betrayal quotes and vague digs about certain family members. Megan made her account private. And just like that, their smear campaign dried up. But I wasn't done. Because while they were busy trying to burn my name down, they'd forgotten something. I still had control over the family trust. The one Grandpa had set up decades ago to help future generations. A trust I'd been named sole executor of when he passed, and which had some very specific clauses in the fine print. Clauses no one else had bothered to read. One of those clauses? In the event any beneficiary initiates public legal, media, or reputational action against another beneficiary, said actor's access to the trust may be revoked, pending executor review. So I revoked them, not out of spite, out of necessity, because Grandpa knew what they were capable of. He'd seen it happen before. How his own brother once turned on him for a piece of land. How that drama tore their family apart. So he built safeguards. And now, I was the safeguard. I sent the revocation letters via certified mail. No fanfare. Just clean, clinical language. Tyler and Megan were officially removed from the trust. Effective immediately. A week later, the screaming started again. My phone lit up like fireworks. Voicemails, messages from fake numbers, even an email from my dad begging me to reconsider. "You've made your point," he wrote. "Now let's fix this." But that was the thing. They thought this was about a point. That I'd frozen the accounts and pulled support just to prove something. They still didn't understand. It wasn't revenge. It was release. For the first time in years, I wasn't tangled in their crises. I wasn't the fallback, the fixer, the guilt provider. I was just me. Independent. Clear-headed. Free. Tyler eventually tried to file a complaint in probate court, claiming I had unjustly enriched myself at the expense of the family. It went nowhere. Mark showed up to court with a 3-inch binder of evidence and walked the judge through every detail, from the trust language to the harassment I'd endured. The judge dismissed the case in under 20 minutes. As for Megan, she made one last attempt. I was at a local cafe when she slid into the seat across from me without asking. She looked tired. No makeup, hair pulled back, voice quiet. "I just want to know why," she said. "Why would you destroy your own family like this?" I looked at her for a long time, then said, "Because it wasn't a family. It was a machine, and I was the fuel. I just stopped pouring myself in." She blinked. "So that's it? You're done with us?" "No," I said. "You were done with me the moment I said no. Everything after that was just you proving it." She didn't cry. I'll give her that. She just stood up and left. That was the last time I saw any of them in person. It's been 8 months now. In that time, I've changed everything. I moved to a new apartment in a different part of the city, took a sabbatical from work and started traveling. Small towns, places Grandpa loved. I even found an old storage unit of his with journals, letters, and photos I'd never seen before. I spent a week reading through them, and for the first time, I felt like I was getting to know the man behind the quiet wisdom. I donated a chunk of the inheritance to a community center he used to volunteer at. Quietly. No plaque, no name. Just a note. For someone who always showed up when no one else did. I don't miss the drama, the noise, the empty holidays filled with fake smiles and secret scorekeeping. I've made new traditions, real ones, with people who don't see me as a wallet or a resource. And sometimes, late at night, I wonder if they ever sit around that old dining room table, staring at the empty seat where I used to be, and think, maybe we went too far. But I don't dwell on it. Because in the end, I didn't lose a family. I just finally saw them for who they really were. And I walked away. That was the victory. That was the peace. That was the freedom. My name's Paul. I'm 36 years old, and this past Christmas cracked something in me that had been sitting quietly for years. I always thought my family was unfair, sure, but I convinced myself it was just little things I needed to let go. A cutting comment here, a forgotten invite there. Small injustices that didn't warrant a fight. But sometimes, it's not the big blowouts that finally break you. It's death by 1,000 cuts, and the moment you realize your kids are bleeding from those same wounds, that's when you stop letting it slide. We'd all been told weeks in advance by my mom. This year we're keeping Christmas small. No gifts, no fuss, just dinner and being together. She'd repeated it more than once in the group chat, almost like she was hammering the message into stone. My wife and I exchanged glances the first time she said it, and I remember saying, honestly, it might be nice. Less stress. My kids, Michael, who's 11, and Sophie, who's 8, were disappointed, but we explained that Christmas isn't about gifts, it's about family. And to be honest, I believed it myself. The thing is, my parents have always been transparent about their favoritism. My brother, Daniel, is 2 years younger than me, and for as long as I can remember, he's been the golden child. He could wreck the car in high school, and it was boys will be boys. I got a B on a math test once, and I was lectured for weeks about wasting potential. When he dropped out of college, Dad helped him land a cushy job at his firm. When I graduated with honors and lined up my own career, it was, well, don't get cocky, life's long. I used to laugh it off, tell myself I was being paranoid, but the pattern was too consistent to ignore. Still, as adults, you try to put old resentments aside. I thought, at least around the holidays, we could be just a family again. And so we showed up on Christmas Day with bottles of wine, a tray of homemade cookies, and the firm belief that we were all playing by the same no presents rule. Sophie even drew a little Christmas card for my parents with stick figures of the whole family around the tree, and she handed it to my mom like it was treasure. Dinner was fine at first. The smell of roasted turkey, the fire crackling in the living room, kids running around in their socks. I even caught myself smiling as my dad told one of his old war stories for the 100th time. For a moment, I thought maybe this Christmas really would be different. But then, after dessert, my mom clapped her hands and said, "All right, everyone, gather in the living room. We have a surprise." That's when I realized I'd been naive. My brother's kids, teenagers, old enough to know how things work, sat down in front of the tree, and suddenly, boxes started appearing. Not just any boxes. Shiny, expensive-looking boxes, each one wrapped in silver paper and big bows. I froze, my arms still draped over the back of the couch. Michael leaned forward, his face lighting up, assuming maybe this was for all the grandkids. Sophie whispered, "Presents," in that small, hopeful voice kids use when they think magic might be real after all. But every box had one name on it, Daniel's Kids. They tore into the paper like a commercial, and out came brand new MacBooks, designer bags, headphones, stuff that even as adults, my wife and I would have been stunned to receive. Sophie's mouth dropped open, and Michael glanced at me with confusion, like he was waiting for me to say, "Don't worry, yours are coming next." Except they weren't. My dad actually looked at me then, caught my eye, and smirked. He leaned back in his chair with his glass of scotch and said, "You understand." Not a question, a statement. Like this was just how things worked, and I'd better swallow it. I felt the heat rise in my chest. My wife squeezed my knee under the table, probably trying to keep me from exploding in front of everyone. But what gutted me wasn't the smirk, or the gifts, or even the blatant lie we'd all been told. It was Sophie, quietly sliding closer to me and whispering, "Dad, why didn't Santa come for us?" And Michael, older and more aware, staring at the floor and blinking fast because he didn't want anyone to see him cry. I helped them into their coats not long after that, telling my mom and dad that we had to get home early, even though we didn't. The air outside bit at my face, but it was nothing compared to the cold I felt inside. My kids walked in silence to the car. Sophie climbed into her booster seat without a word, and Michael buckled himself in stiffly. On the drive home, my wife finally said, "Paul, this isn't just favoritism anymore. This was cruel." And she was right. I stayed up late that night, staring at the glow of the Christmas tree in our own living room. The presents we had bought our kids, small things, books, board games, a couple of toys, sat neatly wrapped under the tree, waiting for morning. I thought about my parents' faces when Sophie handed them that handmade card, how they smiled politely and tucked it aside like it was nothing. I thought about Dad's smirk, Mom's clapping, Daniel's smug grin as his kids showed off their gifts. And that's when I realized something. They didn't expect me to do anything. They counted on me to swallow it, to understand, like always. But this time I didn't. The next morning, while Michael and Sophie tore into their own gifts and laughed like the night before hadn't happened, I sat at the kitchen table drafting a letter. Not a text, not a call, an old-fashioned, printed, sealed letter. Every word was deliberate, sharp, and final. By the time I signed my name at the bottom, I knew exactly what it would mean for my parents, and for Daniel too. When the letter arrived on their doorstep later that week, my mom called me. For the first time in my life, her voice wasn't firm or dismissive. It was shaky. My dad didn't smirk that time. They were speechless. And that was just the beginning. The morning after Christmas should have been peaceful. In our house, it was, at least on the surface. My kids laughed, playing with their new games, Sophie running around with her doll tucked under her arm, while Michael tried to set up his new board game. My wife and I exchanged little smiles across the kitchen table, but under it all, my mind was miles away. I couldn't stop replaying the night before. The silver wrapping paper, the smirk on my dad's face, the way my brother leaned back like he was king of the castle. The letter I'd written sat sealed on the counter, addressed to my parents. I wasn't even sure I was going to mail it yet, but just knowing it existed felt like I'd finally stood up, even if only in private. My wife noticed me staring at it, tapping my fingers against my coffee mug. "Paul," she said softly, "whatever you decide to do, just don't let them keep hurting you. Or the kids. Please." That's the part that stuck with me, the kids. Because in all the years of enduring favoritism, I'd been able to grit my teeth and carry on. But now it wasn't just me anymore. It was them. And that wasn't something I could shrug off. By the 27th, the phone call started. Mom left a voicemail. "Paul, we noticed you left early on Christmas. Everything okay?" The kids seemed quiet. The way she said it, as though my kids being crushed by blatant favoritism was some puzzling mystery, nearly made me throw the phone across the room. Then came another call later that day, this time from my dad. "Son, don't overthink things. You've always been a little sensitive. Christmas is about joy, not drama." The words dripped with dismissal, the same tone he used when I was 12 and dared to complain that Daniel got a new bike while I got socks. I didn't answer either call. I didn't need to. But what I hadn't expected was for Daniel to reach out. On the 28th, I got a text. "Hey, sorry about the mix-up at Christmas. Mom and Dad just wanted to surprise the kids with something special. Don't take it personal. You know how it is." I stared at that message for a long time. Don't take it personal. I could almost hear his smug voice, the way he always framed things as if I was the unreasonable one. My wife read it over my shoulder and muttered, "Mix-up? They planned that whole thing." She wasn't wrong. They had coordinated gifts, bows, a big unveiling. That wasn't a mix-up, it was a statement. I typed a reply 3 times and erased it each time. The final message I sent was short. "Glad your kids enjoyed Christmas." Nothing else. Let him read into it whatever way he wanted. That night, I finally dropped the letter in the mailbox. The metal clang of the lid shutting down felt like a door closing behind me. 2 days later, the fallout began. My mom showed up at my house unannounced. No call, no text, just her knocking on the door at 10 in the morning with her winter coat still dusted with snow. My wife answered, and I heard the shift in her voice from warm to tense in half a second. "Paul, it's your mom." I came to the door, and she immediately started in, her face tight. "We got your letter." She held her purse in front of her like a shield. "I can't believe you'd accuse us of neglecting your children on Christmas." "Accuse," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. "Mom, they watched their cousins unwrap thousands of dollars in gifts while they sat empty-handed. And you told us, explicitly, that this year was no presents. How is that not neglect?" Her lips pinched. "It wasn't neglect. It was different circumstances. Your father and I thought Daniel's kids could use a boost right now. They're in high school, preparing for college. We wanted to set them up with the tools they'll need. You're established, Paul. You have a good job. Your kids aren't hurting for anything." I actually laughed at that, a short, bitter sound. "So because I work hard and don't ask for handouts, my kids get overlooked?" She straightened her shoulders. "Don't twist this. You've always been dramatic. We've supported you plenty over the years." "Really?" I asked. "When? Name one time you've supported me without comparing me to Daniel in the same breath." She opened her mouth, then closed it. Her silence was answer enough. Finally, she sighed, almost like she was tired of me. "Paul, you need to let this go. It was just Christmas. Don't make it bigger than it is." But to me, it was bigger. It always had been. After she left, the tension in the house thickened. My wife hugged me in the kitchen and whispered, "You did the right thing. Don't let them rewrite this." But I couldn't shake the feeling that more was coming. And I was right. The following weekend, we were invited to a family brunch at my parents' house. The invitation wasn't really a request, it was an expectation. My dad's voice on the phone was firm. "Be here at noon. We need to talk as a family." My stomach turned, but against my better judgment, we went. I told myself maybe, just maybe, they wanted to apologize. Maybe they had seen how much their actions had hurt the kids. But when we arrived, I knew immediately that wasn't the case. The dining room table was set with eggs, bacon, pancakes, the usual spread. Daniel and his family were already there, sitting smugly as if they owned the place. My mom gestured for us to sit, but there was no warmth in her eyes. My dad cleared his throat, resting his elbows on the table. "Paul," he began, "we read your letter. And frankly, we think you owe us an apology." My wife's fork clattered against her plate. "An apology? For what?" "For accusing us of favoritism and trying to drive a wedge in this family," Dad said firmly. "It's not right. We've done everything we can for you. And instead of gratitude, we get accusations." Daniel chimed in then, smirking. "You're always playing the victim, Paul. You've got a good life, a nice house, a stable job. But you can't stand that mom and dad sometimes help me out. I clenched my fists under the table. Help you out? Daniel, you've been handed everything since you were born. And now my kids have to suffer for it. He shrugged. Your kids are fine. You're just upset because for once, people saw them not getting the spotlight. That was the moment I realized this wasn't about fairness or misunderstandings. It was about control. They wanted me to accept my place. The overlooked son, the quiet one who never made a scene. They wanted me to sit at that table, smile, and tell them they were right. But I didn't. I won't apologize, I said evenly. Not when you hurt my children. The room went silent. My mom's eyes narrowed, and my dad's jaw tightened. Daniel leaned back in his chair, grinning like he'd won something. And in that silence, I felt something shift. This wasn't just a family disagreement anymore. This was a battle line being drawn. And once it was drawn, there was no going back. When I refused to apologize that day at the brunch table, the silence that followed wasn't just uncomfortable, it was dangerous. You could feel the shift, like the whole house had tilted and everyone was scrambling to find their footing. My mom pursed her lips, her hands folding and unfolding in her lap. My dad's face turned red, his knuckles tightening around his coffee mug. And Daniel, of course, leaned back with that smug grin that said he was enjoying every second of this. Paul, my dad said finally, his voice sharp enough to cut glass. Do you have any idea how ungrateful you sound? Your mother has bent over backwards for this family for years. And this, he jabbed a finger toward me like I was a defendant in court. This is how you repay her? With accusations? With poison? Poison, I repeated, my voice rising. Dad, my kids cried on Christmas. They asked why Santa didn't bring them anything when their cousins got everything. And your response was to smirk and say I should understand. If that's not favoritism, what is it? Mom's eyes hardened. Your children are not starving, Paul. They have parents who provide for them. You're twisting a joyful night into some sob story because you can't let go of your resentment toward your brother. I almost laughed at the absurdity, but I could see my wife's hand trembling as she reached for her water glass. She hated confrontation, but even she couldn't stay quiet. This isn't about Paul's resentment. It's about fairness. It's about telling us no gifts, then staging a spectacle for Daniel's kids. That wasn't oversight. That was deliberate. Daniel leaned forward then, dropping his smirk for something colder. Maybe it was deliberate, he said, his tone dripping with contempt. Maybe Mom and Dad wanted to send a message. Your kids don't need gifts to be happy. Mine do. They have more pressure, more responsibility, more expectations on them. They're being prepared for the real world. Yours, well, they'll be fine. The audacity of it nearly floored me. Prepared for the real world? I shot back. By being handed MacBooks and luxury bags? You mean spoiled for the real world? Dad slammed his hand on the table. The dishes rattled. Enough. This is not up for debate. We are your parents. We will not be disrespected in our own home. If you can't accept how we choose to celebrate, then maybe you shouldn't come around. The words hung in the air like smoke. My chest tightened. It was one thing to be overlooked, but to be told, flat out, that my presence was conditional on my obedience? That cut deeper than anything before. My wife stood then, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. Come on, Paul. Kids, let's go. Her voice was steady, but I could see the fire in her eyes. Michael and Sophie slid off their chairs quickly, sensing the storm. As we gathered our coats, my mom called after me, her voice sharp. Paul, don't you dare punish us by keeping the children away. They're our grandchildren. They deserve to know their family. I turned back at the doorway. Then maybe you should start acting like family to them. We left, the heavy silence in the car on the ride home broken only by Sophie asking quietly, Daddy, are we in trouble? I gripped the steering wheel tighter than I meant to. No, sweetheart. You're not in trouble. None of this is your fault. But in that moment, I felt something crack inside me. It wasn't just about Christmas anymore. It wasn't about gifts. It was about respect. It was about a lifetime of being shoved into the shadows, of being told to understand, of being treated like my worth, and now my children's worth, was negotiable. Over the next few weeks, the phone calls became relentless. My parents left messages demanding we come by to work this out. Daniel sent texts dripping with mockery. Still sulking? Grow up. At first, I ignored them. Then, when they wouldn't stop, I sent one reply. Leave us alone until you're ready to treat us with respect. That only seemed to escalate things. On January 10th, I got a call from Michael's school. The principal asked if everything was all right at home. Confused, I asked why. He told me my parents had shown up at the school office that morning, demanding to see their grandson. When the school refused without my permission, my dad apparently told them I was unstable and that they were worried for the kid's well-being. I couldn't breathe for a moment. My own parents, undermining me as a father in front of the school, casting doubt on my stability. That wasn't favoritism anymore. That was betrayal. When I confronted them later that evening on the phone, Mom didn't even deny it. "We had to do something, Paul. You're poisoning the children against us. We won't let you take them away from us." "Take them away?" I was shaking. "You did that yourself when you made them feel like outsiders in their own family." Dad's voice cut in, cold and deliberate. "If you want to play this game, Paul, you'll lose. You think you're protecting your children, but what you're really doing is making them resent you. They'll see the truth one day, that you're the one who kept them from us." I hung up, my hands trembling. My wife sat beside me, her face pale. "Paul," she whispered, "this isn't just favoritism anymore. This is war." And she was right. The breaking point came 2 weeks later. We'd been invited, well, summoned might be the better word, to Daniel's house for his daughter's birthday. Against every instinct in me, I went, mostly because Michael begged. "Please, Dad, I just want to see my cousins. We don't have to stay long." So we went. And at first, it was normal enough. Cake, balloons, the usual chaos of kids running around. But halfway through, Daniel stood up with a glass in his hand and called for attention. "I just want to take a moment to thank my amazing parents," he said, beaming, "for all they do for us. Not just for me, but for my kids. You've given them opportunities, support, and love. We couldn't do it without you." Everyone clapped. My parents smiled, soaking it in. And then Daniel's eyes slid to me, sharp as knives. And to my brother, "Well, I hope one day you'll learn what family really means." The room went quiet, eyes turning to me. My kids froze, looking up at me in confusion. My wife stiffened beside me. That's when I realized this wasn't just a jab. This was coordinated. They had turned a birthday party into a stage for my humiliation. And as I stood there, every muscle in my body taut, my mom chimed in sweetly. "We only want the best for all our grandchildren, Paul. Some of them just need a little more guidance than others." The implication was clear. They weren't just undermining me privately anymore. They were doing it publicly. I clenched my jaw, forcing a smile for Michael and Sophie's sake. But inside, something inside me snapped for good. And that's when I decided I wasn't just going to defend myself. I was going to make sure they'd regret underestimating me. Because if they wanted a war, they had just declared it. The ride home from Daniel's house after that birthday party was one of the longest of my life. The kids were silent in the back seat, staring out their windows, the glow of streetlights flickering across their faces. My wife sat stiff beside me, her arms folded, her jaw clenched. And me? I just drove, my knuckles white against the steering wheel, replaying every word, every smirk, every pair of eyes on me as my family took turns painting me as the black sheep in front of an entire room. I wanted to scream. I wanted to turn the car around and march back into that house and unload everything I'd bottled up for years. But I didn't, because I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw Sophie chewing her lip, holding back tears, and Michael fiddling with the zipper on his jacket like he couldn't sit still. They were the reason I didn't explode. They had seen enough already. When we got home, I tucked them into bed without much said. Sophie clung to me a little longer than usual. "Daddy," she whispered, "why does Uncle Daniel always get everything? Did we do something wrong?" That question nearly broke me. I kissed her forehead and forced my voice steady. "No, sweetheart. You didn't do anything wrong. Sometimes people don't see what's right in front of them. But I see you, and I know how amazing you are." She smiled weakly, but I could tell it didn't fully sink in. How could it, when every family gathering painted a different picture? After the kids were asleep, my wife and I sat in the living room, the only light coming from the Christmas tree we still hadn't taken down. The ornaments sparkled faintly, but it felt hollow now, like the season had been tainted. "Paul," she said quietly, "I can't keep doing this. Watching them humiliate you, watching our kids feel like second-class family members. It's not fair." I leaned forward, burying my face in my hands. "I know. I keep hoping it'll change. That one day they'll wake up and realize how much damage they're doing." Her voice softened. "But they won't. They've shown you who they are. Over and over again. She was right, of course. But admitting it out loud felt like admitting defeat. The weeks that followed were heavy. Every time my phone buzzed with a message from my parents or Daniel, my stomach twisted. Most of the time, I ignored them. But when I did read them, they were all the same. Guilt, manipulation, little barbs disguised as concern. Paul, family shouldn't fight like this. You're overreacting, son. Don't teach your children bitterness. You've always been too sensitive. Bring the kids over. Let them see what real love looks like. That last one especially made my blood boil. Real love. As if the tears on Christmas, the humiliation at the birthday party, the whispered questions from my daughter weren't proof enough that their version of love was twisted. But despite my anger, the weight of it all began to seep into me. Work became harder. I'd sit at my desk staring at spreadsheets, my mind drifting back to that brunch table or Daniel's smirk. My boss pulled me aside one afternoon and asked if everything was okay. I lied and said I was just tired from the holidays. At home, my patience thinned. I snapped at the kids for little things, spilled juice, loud voices, things that never would have bothered me before. Each time, guilt crushed me afterward. I'd apologize, hug them, but I could see the confusion in their eyes. They didn't understand why Dad seemed so different. Even my marriage felt the strain. My wife tried to be supportive, but I could tell the constant tension was wearing her down. One night, she finally said, "Paul, you have to decide. Either we cut them off completely, or we find some way to stand up to them. But this in between, this waiting for the next attack, it's tearing us apart." Her words sat in my chest like lead. The lowest point came in February. It was Michael's school play. He had a small role, just a few lines, but he was excited. We invited my parents, even though every part of me screamed not to. Maybe, I thought, if they saw him on stage, they'd feel some pride. Maybe they'd see him the way I did. They came, sat in the third row, right beside Daniel and his family. And when Michael walked on stage, his little voice carrying across the auditorium, I looked at them. My mom was fiddling with her phone. My dad was whispering something to Daniel. My parents didn't even clap when Michael finished his lines. But when Daniel's daughter came on stage, just to carry a prop, nothing more, they erupted into applause like she was the star of Broadway. I saw Michael's face fall. He glanced at them, then at me. That hurt worse than anything. That night, after the kids were asleep, I sat alone in the kitchen. My wife had gone to bed early, drained from holding me together for months. I stared at the fridge door, covered in drawings and report cards, little reminders of my kids' worth. My chest ached. I had never felt so powerless, so defeated. And yet, in that quiet, something began to shift. I thought about all the years I'd swallowed my pride. About every time I'd let my parents dictate the terms of what family meant. About how many times I'd been told to understand. And I realized, understanding hadn't earned me respect. It had only earned me more abuse. For the first time, I wondered what it would look like if I stopped playing their game altogether. If I walked away, not just in anger, but with intention. If I built something for my kids so strong that they'd never again question their worth, no matter what anyone else said. It wasn't a plan yet, just a spark. A thought I tucked quietly into the corner of my mind. But it was enough to steady me, at least for that night. The next morning, I went to work and did something I hadn't done in months. I focused. Really focused. Every time my phone buzzed with a call from my parents, I ignored it. Every time a text from Daniel popped up, I deleted it. Instead, I threw myself into my job. I stayed late, volunteered for projects, sharpened skills I hadn't used in years. It wasn't revenge. Not yet. It was survival. But as I sat at my desk one evening, the office quiet around me, I realized something important. Survival was the first step. Power came next. And deep down, I knew power was what I would need if I ever wanted to face them again. Something changed the day I decided to stop answering their calls. It wasn't dramatic. No slammed phone. No shouted, "I'm done." Just silence. Silence where their voices had once dictated my mood. Silence where their manipulation had once made me feel small. And in that silence, I started hearing myself again. The first sign of progress came at work. I'd thrown myself into projects partly to distract myself, partly to prove to myself that I wasn't the useless, sensitive son my parents always implied I was. My company had a major account on the line, a client that could either walk away or sign a contract that would keep us busy for the next 3 years. Normally, Someone higher up would have handled it. But my boss, maybe sensing I needed a chance, asked me to step in. I poured everything I had into that presentation. Late nights, early mornings, coffee-fueled weekends. And when the day came, I stood in that boardroom, facing a half-dozen executives, and I realized I wasn't nervous. For once, I wasn't hearing my dad's voice in my head telling me not to get cocky. I was hearing my own. The deal closed. Not just closed, it exceeded every target. My boss shook my hand and said, "Paul, that was masterful. You just put yourself on the map." For the first time in months, I walked out of a building with my shoulders squared and my chest lifted. And when I got home, I hugged my wife and kids tighter than usual. "Guess what?" I told them. "Dad did something big today." Michael grinned, Sophie squealed, and my wife looked at me like she hadn't seen me glow like that in years. The recognition didn't stop there. Within weeks, I was invited into leadership meetings. Colleagues started asking for my input, not out of politeness, but because they trusted me. My confidence grew, step by step, like a muscle finally being exercised after years of atrophy. At home, I made a conscious effort to repair what I'd strained during the darker months. I set aside work at dinner, asked the kids about their days, actually listened. I played board games with Michael, even when I was exhausted. I let Sophie braid my hair with neon clips and giggle when it stuck up in every direction. Slowly, I saw the confusion in their eyes replaced with light again. My wife noticed too. One night, as we sat on the couch after the kids went to bed, she leaned against me and whispered, "I've missed this version of you." I kissed her forehead. I think I missed me too. It wasn't all smooth sailing. My parents didn't stop trying to reel me back in. They left voicemails, sent cards, even had Daniel bump into me outside my office building one afternoon. He leaned against my car like he owned it, arms crossed. "You think you're better than us now?" he sneered. "Heard you got some promotion." I looked at him, really looked at him, and realized something. He wasn't smug. Not really. He was scared. Scared that I was stepping out of the role they'd carved for me. The shadow that made his spotlight look brighter. "I don't think I'm better than you, Daniel," I said calmly. "I just think I'm done playing your game." He scowled, muttered something under his breath, and walked away. For once, I didn't follow him with anger in my chest. I just unlocked my car, got in, and drove home to the family that mattered. As the months passed, opportunities kept appearing. I was offered a chance to lead a new division at work, something I never would have imagined a year ago. The salary increase wasn't life-changing, but it was significant. Enough to give us breathing room, to start planning trips, to put more into the kids' future. But more than money, it was the respect. People looked at me differently now. Not as an afterthought, not as someone filling a seat, but as someone who had earned his place. That respect bled into other parts of my life too. I started volunteering at Michael's school, helping coach the chess club. At first, I felt awkward, convinced I'd embarrass myself. But when Michael introduced me to his friends as my dad, "He's really good at chess," I realized it wasn't about being perfect. It was about showing up. Sophie's dance recital came that spring, and I sat in the front row, camera ready. When she twirled across the stage, her face lit with pride, I clapped so loudly she covered her face and giggled. Later, she whispered in my ear, "Thanks for always cheering, Daddy." That moment meant more than any contract, any paycheck. And while I was building myself back up, I started noticing things I hadn't before. The cracks in my parents' armor. The way their calls shifted from demanding to pleading. The way Daniel's texts grew less smug and more desperate. "You're ruining this family. Don't you care what people think?" That last line made me laugh bitterly. For once, I didn't care. Not about their version of family. Not about their opinion of me. Because I finally understood something. Their power over me had always been borrowed. Borrowed from my silence, from my fear, from my desire to belong. And now that I wasn't lending it anymore, they had nothing. Still, I wasn't naive. I knew they wouldn't give up easily. People like them never do. They thrive on control, and when it slips, they claw harder. That's why I started planning quietly. Nothing dramatic, nothing obvious. Just small, deliberate steps. I updated legal documents, wills, insurance policies, making sure my family was protected and independent. I kept records of every message, every voicemail, every attempt at manipulation. I didn't know yet what I'd do with them, but I knew better than to walk unarmed into whatever storm they were brewing. Most importantly, I kept building my life, brick by brick. Because the stronger I became, the less they could touch me. By summer, I felt like a different man. Not invincible, not free of scars, but stronger. My wife noticed it in the way I carried myself. My kids noticed it in the way I laughed more easily. Even colleagues noticed it in the way I spoke up in meetings. And slowly, a thought began to take root. A dangerous thought. What if I didn't just walk away from their game? What if I turned it around? What if, instead of always being on the defensive, I showed them, calmly, undeniably, that the son they had dismissed and underestimated had built something bigger than their approval could ever give him? The idea simmered quietly, tucked behind my day-to-day life. I didn't share it with anyone, not even my wife. But it was there, glowing faintly, waiting for its moment. And I had no idea how soon that moment would come. Because one late summer evening, as I sat on the porch watching the kids chase fireflies in the yard, my phone buzzed. It was a message from my mom. Just 5 words, but enough to make my stomach tighten. We need to discuss the will. When I saw those words on my phone, we need to discuss the will. It was like the air shifted around me. Not because I hadn't expected it. Deep down, I knew this day would come eventually. My parents had always dangled money and inheritance like strings to control us. But the timing, the casual bluntness of it, hit me hard. I stared at the message for a long time, the laughter of my kids chasing fireflies echoing faintly in the background. My wife came out with 2 glasses of iced tea, noticed the look on my face, and asked, "What is it?" I handed her the phone. She read it, her brow furrowing. "Of course," she said bitterly. "When all else fails, they fall back on the one thing they think will keep you chained, money." She wasn't wrong. For as long as I could remember, my dad made little comments about the estate, or the lake house, or the retirement accounts. Always vague enough to keep me guessing, but sharp enough to remind me of the stakes. When Daniel messed up, it was never, "You failed." It was, "Don't worry, you'll still get your share one day." And when I tried to stand my ground, the warning was always, "Careful, Paul. You don't want to burn bridges. You know what's at stake." It was their most effective tool. The unspoken promise that if I just kept quiet, if I just understood, there'd be something waiting for me. And I'll admit, for years, it worked. I told myself I wasn't staying quiet for me. I was staying quiet for my kids, for their future. But that text, that cold, transactional text, did something different. Instead of pulling me back under their control, it lit something in me. Because suddenly, I realized, what if I didn't need it? What if I built something so strong for my family that their inheritance was irrelevant? I didn't respond to the message right away. Instead, I started researching. Not angrily, not impulsively, carefully. I read about wills, trusts, estates. I learned that just because someone threatens to cut you out doesn't mean they hold all the cards. And the more I learned, the more I saw how flimsy their power actually was. But then something happened that shifted the balance even further. At work, the success I'd had earlier in the year kept snowballing. One afternoon, my boss called me into his office and closed the door. "Paul," he said, "we've been impressed with your leadership. We'd like you to head up a new project, something big." It wasn't just big. It was transformative. Leading this project meant travel, exposure, connections I'd never dreamed of. It meant stepping into circles my family couldn't touch. And with it came a salary bump so significant that when I showed my wife the offer letter that night, she sat at the kitchen table, stunned. "Paul," she whispered, "this changes everything." She was right. Overnight, we went from comfortable but cautious to secure. We could finally breathe. We could plan for the kids' college without worry. We could take trips. We could live without glancing at the check every time we went out to dinner. And most importantly, it meant that whatever my parents dangled in front of me no longer mattered. I didn't tell them about the promotion. Not yet. I let them think I was still the same Paul they could manipulate. Because I knew better now. Information was power. And silence was a weapon. When I finally replied to my mom's text 2 days later, I kept it simple. "Sure. Let me know when." She wasted no time. "Come by Sunday. Noon. Bring your wife." That Sunday, we walked into my parents' house and were immediately hit with the familiar chill. The smell of my mom's cooking lingered, but there was no warmth behind it. Daniel was already there, of course, sitting at the head of the table like he owned it. He glanced at me with that same old smirk, though I noticed something else behind it this time, a flicker of unease. We sat down. My dad cleared his throat and launched into it. "Your mother and I have been reviewing our estate. It's time to make some decisions about the will." We want everything to be clear so there are no misunderstandings later. I stayed quiet, letting him talk. As it stands, he continued, the bulk of the estate, the house, the lake property, the investment accounts, will go to Daniel. He's here. He's been the one helping us maintain things, and frankly, it makes sense. Of course, Paul, you'll have your share. But we want you to understand the reasoning. There it was again. Understand. That word that had followed me like a shadow my whole life. I nodded slowly. I see. Daniel leaned forward, eager. It's not personal, Paul. It's just practical. You've got your job, your stability. I've been here, doing the heavy lifting. I almost laughed. Heavy lifting. The man who still called my dad when his sink leaked was claiming responsibility for maintaining their estate. But I didn't bite. Not yet. My mom chimed in. We just don't want this to cause tension. Family should come before money. We're being transparent, so no one feels blindsided later. I glanced at my wife, who kept her expression carefully neutral. Then I looked back at my parents. I appreciate the transparency, I said evenly. And that was it. I didn't fight. I didn't argue. I didn't beg. Because I knew something they didn't. I didn't need what they were offering. And the fact that they thought I did was exactly what gave me the upper hand. Over the next few weeks, I kept building quietly. I expanded my professional network, forged connections with people who could open doors far beyond what my family's name ever could. I started setting up a college fund for my kids, bigger than anything my parents could have left us. I even looked into real estate opportunities, a chance to build something lasting, something mine. At the same time, I kept a close eye on my parents and Daniel. The more I pulled away, the more desperate they seemed. My dad called more often, his tone shifting from authoritative to almost cajoling. Son, you need to come by more. The kids should spend time here. My mom sent photos of Daniel's kids with captions like, don't you want your children to be close to their cousins? And Daniel, well, his mask started to slip. He texted me late one night, clearly after a few drinks. You think you're better than me? You'll see. When the will is finalized, you'll regret the way you've treated mom and dad. I didn't reply, but I saved the message. Because now, I wasn't just enduring. I was collecting, watching, waiting. And then, in early autumn, the opportunity presented itself. I got a call from an old family friend, someone who had worked with my father for decades. We caught up for a while, and then, almost offhandedly, he said, funny thing, your dad's been making a lot of noise about the estate lately. But between you and me, Paul, the finances aren't as solid as he makes them out to be. My stomach tightened. What do you mean? He lowered his voice. Let's just say your brother's been dipping into things more than he should, and your dad's been covering for him. I don't know the details, but, well, you didn't hear it from me. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling. If it was true, if Daniel had been quietly siphoning money, and my parents were too proud or too blinded to admit it, then everything about their estate was a house of cards. And suddenly, I realized I didn't just have independence anymore. I had leverage. Because the son they thought was powerless, the one they assumed would understand and fall in line, was now holding the one thing they feared most. The truth. The revelation about Daniel siphoning money sat in my chest like a glowing coal. At first, I didn't know what to do with it. Should I confront my parents? Demand answers? My instinct, honed by years of their manipulation, was to hesitate, to second-guess myself. But the more I thought about it, the clearer it became. This wasn't just a chance to defend myself. This was the moment I'd been waiting for, the moment to take back the narrative, to show them, calmly and undeniably, that the son they dismissed had been watching all along. The first step was confirming what I'd heard. I didn't want to go off rumors, so I started carefully. I requested some public records, checked on property deeds, investment filings, anything that could give me a picture of what was really going on. I knew my father liked to talk big about the estate, but I suspected it wasn't nearly as untouchable as he made it sound. And slowly, a pattern emerged. A loan against the lake house that hadn't been mentioned. Transfers from an account my dad once bragged about being for the grandkids. Payments that didn't line up with his or my mom's lifestyle. And then, clear as day, a record showing Daniel as a beneficiary of a suspiciously large consulting fee routed through a business tied to my father's name. I sat at my desk one night staring at the papers, my hands trembling, not from fear this time, but from a strange, cold clarity. It was true. Daniel had been bleeding the estate dry, and my parents had been either complicit or too weak to stop him. For years, they had used the promise of inheritance as a leash. And now I knew that leash was nothing but frayed string. I didn't rush to act. That wasn't the point. Revenge, I realized, wasn't about explosion. It was about exposure, about holding up a mirror and letting them choke on their own reflection. The opportunity came sooner than I expected. In October, my mom sent another text. Family dinner this Sunday. Important. Please bring the children. We want to clear the air. I showed my wife the message. She raised an eyebrow. Clear the air? Or tighten the leash? Maybe both, I said. But in my gut, I knew it was my chance. That Sunday, we walked into my parents' house to find the dining room set like a scene from a magazine. Candles, polished silver, my mom's best china. Daniel and his family were already there, of course. My parents greeted us with forced smiles, the kind that didn't reach their eyes. We ate in strained politeness until my dad finally set down his fork and cleared his throat. "Paul," he began, "we've been thinking. It's time to finalize the will. We don't want any confusion. We want it in writing that everyone understands." There it was again. That word. Understand. He went on, his tone heavy with authority. "The house, the lake property, the bulk of the accounts, they'll go to Daniel. It's only right. He's been here, supporting us, helping with everything. You'll have your portion, of course, but smaller. You're secure on your own. This way, there's no resentment later." My mom nodded, as if she'd just delivered a sermon on fairness. "We want peace in this family, Paul. This is the way to achieve it." I let the silence stretch for a moment. Everyone at the table watching me, waiting for me to do what I'd always done, swallow, nod, and understand. Instead, I leaned back in my chair and said quietly, "I think it's time we actually talk about what Daniel's been taking." The room froze. Daniel stiffened, his smirk faltering. My dad's face went pale. My mom's fork clattered against her plate. "What are you talking about?" my dad demanded. I pulled a folder from my bag and set it on the table. Calmly, deliberately, I slid out the records I'd gathered. The loan against the lake house. The transfers from the grandkids' account. The consulting fee that went straight into Daniel's pocket. "I'm talking about this," I said evenly. "Years of you telling me to understand, while Daniel helped himself to what you kept dangling in front of me. And you covered for him." Daniel sputtered, his face turning red. That's business stuff. You don't understand how it works." "Actually," I cut in, my voice firm, "I do. I understand perfectly. You've been draining the estate you're so proud of. And the best part? You've been bragging about leaving it behind as if it's still whole. But it's not, is it?" My father slammed a hand on the table. "You've got no right." I leaned forward, my eyes locked on his. "I have every right. Because for years, you used this inheritance as leverage. You let my kids believe they were less loved, less worthy, while Daniel's kids were showered with gifts bought from accounts that were supposed to belong to all of us. You wanted me to stay quiet, to play the fool. But I'm not quiet anymore." The silence that followed was deafening. My mom finally spoke, her voice trembling. "Paul, if you think exposing this will what?" I asked sharply. "Ruin the family's reputation? Make people see Daniel for what he is? Maybe. Or maybe it'll just make it clear that your entire system of control was built on a lie. Either way, I'm done protecting you." Daniel pushed back from the table, his chair screeching against the floor. "You wouldn't dare. You wouldn't destroy your own family." I looked at him, calm and steady. "You already did. I'm just done pretending otherwise." My wife reached under the table and squeezed my hand. For once, I felt no tremor, no hesitation, just clarity. I gathered the papers back into the folder and stood. "You wanted to finalize things tonight? Consider them finalized. You've shown me exactly where I stand in this family, and I've shown you that I'm not afraid of the truth anymore." As I turned to leave, I caught the look on my parents' faces, a mix of shock, fear, and something else I'd never seen before. Doubt. For the first time in my life, they weren't sure they held the upper hand. And Daniel? His face was red, his fists clenched, his voice cracking as he spat. "You'll regret this, Paul. You'll regret it." But deep down, we both knew the truth. The days of me being the one to regret things were over. The night I laid those papers on the table was the night the foundation of their control cracked. I knew it when I saw the color drain from my father's face, when I caught my mother's hand trembling as she reached for her water glass, when Daniel sputtered like a cornered animal. For once, I wasn't the one shrinking under their glare. They were shrinking under mine. We left their house that evening in silence, my wife's hand steady in mine, the kids tucked in the back seat, unaware of the storm we had just unleashed. I didn't explain much on the ride home. Just told them we were done letting anyone treat them like they didn't matter. Sophie leaned her head against the window and whispered, "Good." In the days that followed, the fallout began in quiet ripples. My mom called twice the next morning, her voice shaky in the voicemail. "Paul, let's talk. We don't need to make this ugly. Please don't show anyone those papers." 2 hours later, my dad called, his tone sharp. "You've made your point. Now drop it. Don't you dare drag this family's name through the mud." And then Daniel. A barrage of texts, each more frantic than the last. "You think you're clever? Those records don't prove anything. You'll ruin us all. You'll regret this." I didn't respond. Not to any of them. Silence, I realized, was louder than shouting. But silence also has a way of stirring panic. By the end of the week, I got a call from that same family friend who had tipped me off originally. "Paul, I don't know what you did," he said, almost chuckling. "But your father is scrambling. Word's getting around. People are asking questions." I thanked him, hung up, and sat there at my desk, the weight of it all sinking in. For years, I had lived under the belief that my parents' approval was currency, that their inheritance was a lifeline, that their word was law. And now, their word was nothing but smoke. A week later, I got the official notice. I had been written out of the will. No share, no portion, not even a token gesture. My father's lawyer sent a stiff letter stating that due to irreconcilable differences, Paul has been removed as a beneficiary. I laughed when I read it. Not bitterly, not angrily, but with genuine relief. Because they still thought that piece of paper was a weapon. They still thought they could wound me with it. But all I saw was proof that I had freed myself from their leash. When I told my wife, she actually smiled. "Good. Now it's in writing that we don't owe them anything." But the true collapse came when Daniel's world started unraveling. A month later, I got another call from that same family friend. His voice was low, conspiratorial. "Paul, it's happening. Your brother's little extracurriculars aren't staying hidden anymore. There's an audit. People are asking where the money went. Your father's name is tied up in it." I won't pretend I didn't feel a rush of satisfaction hearing that. For so long, they'd stood on their pedestal, smug and untouchable. And now the pedestal was crumbling beneath them. Not because of me, but because of their own arrogance, their own refusal to see what Daniel really was. Soon after, my parents called again, this time together. My mom's voice cracked as she begged. "Paul, please, we need your help. You work with people, you understand finances. You can explain this away, you can make it better." I sat at my kitchen table, the phone pressed to my ear, and let her words wash over me. For years, those same voices had told me to understand, to accept, to stay quiet. And now they were the ones asking for understanding. "No," I said simply. "I'm done fixing messes I didn't make." My dad cut in, furious. "You'll regret this, Paul. When this family name is ruined, you'll regret turning your back." I almost smiled. I've regretted a lot of things in my life. Staying silent, letting you make my kids feel small. But walking away from this family, that's not one of them. And then I hung up. The final blow came at Thanksgiving. Against my better judgment, we went, not to my parents' house, but to a larger family gathering hosted by an aunt. I hesitated, worried it would turn into another circus. But my wife urged me, "Let people see who you really are, Paul. Not the story your parents and Daniel have been spinning." So we went. And as we walked in, I felt the shift immediately. People I hadn't spoken to in years approached me warmly. "Paul, good to see you. Your kids are getting so big. Heard you've been doing well at work." Meanwhile, my parents sat stiffly at the far end of the table, whispers swirling around them. Daniel avoided eye contact, his face pale, his smile forced. At one point during dinner, an uncle leaned toward me and murmured, "Funny how the truth always finds its way out." Guess Daniel wasn't quite the golden boy after all. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. The meal went on, laughter and conversation flowing, my kids playing happily with cousins. For once, I wasn't looking over my shoulder, waiting for the next insult or manipulation. I was just there, present, whole. When it came time for toasts, my aunt raised her glass and said, "To family, the real kind. The kind that shows up, lifts you up, and makes you proud." My parents didn't raise their glasses. Neither did Daniel. But I did. And so did my wife, and so did my children, and so did everyone who mattered. That night, as we drove home, Sophie leaned forward from the back seat and asked, "Daddy, why didn't Grandma and Grandpa smile?" I thought for a long moment before answering. Because sometimes, sweetheart, when people lose control, they forget how to smile. But that's their problem, not ours. And as I said it, I realized the truth. I had finally taken back my power. Not by yelling, not by fighting for scraps of approval, but by walking away and letting their own actions destroy them. In the months that followed, my parents' calls grew fewer. Daniel's messages stopped entirely. I heard through the grapevine that the lake house had been sold, quietly, to cover debts. The inheritance they had once lorded over me had evaporated into thin air. And I kept building. My kids thrived. My marriage deepened. My career soared. I didn't need their approval. I didn't need their money. I had something better. A family of my own. One that knew love wasn't measured in gifts or control, but in showing up, in cheering the loudest, in never making someone feel small. One evening, months later, I sat on the porch again, watching the kids chase fireflies. My wife brought out 2 glasses of iced tea, just like she had that night I first got the text about the will. She handed me one, smiled, and said, "Do you ever think about them?" I sipped, thought for a moment, and shook my head. Not anymore. They thought they could define me. But they forgot one thing. She tilted her head. "What's that?" I smiled, watching Michael catch a firefly and Sophie clap her hands in delight. They forgot that I get the final word. And in that quiet, golden moment, I knew they would never take that from me again. My name's Alex. I'm 27, and if you had told me a year ago that one day I'd be lying on my kitchen floor gasping for air while my own mother accused me of faking it, I probably would have laughed and said you'd been watching too many bad soap operas. But here we are. It all started in the middle of an ordinary Saturday afternoon. I was home for the weekend, visiting my mom's house for what was supposed to be a family day. My mom, Sandra, has never been what you'd call warm and nurturing. Growing up, she had 2 settings, cold and critical. If I got an A in school, she'd ask why it wasn't an A+. If I landed a job, she'd ask why it wasn't a better one. And if I ever got sick or hurt, she'd tell me to toughen up. To her, illness was weakness, and weakness was something to be mocked. My aunt, Denise, is my mom's younger sister and a permanent fixture at the house whenever there's a gathering. She's the kind of person who thrives on gossip and finds joy in pointing out other people's flaws, especially mine. She's the fun aunt to my cousins, but when it comes to me, she's got a sarcastic comment for every breath I take. The dynamic between the 2 of them has always been like some twisted comedy duo, my mom as the lead critic, my aunt as the snarky sidekick. That day, the house was buzzing with noise. My cousins were in the living room playing video games. My mom was in the kitchen barking orders about setting the table, and my aunt was sipping wine, acting like the queen of the place. I'd been feeling a bit off since morning, lightheaded, a strange pressure in my chest, but I didn't want to be dramatic. Growing up in that environment trains you to swallow complaints before they ever leave your mouth. While I was helping carry a box of drinks from the garage, the sensation in my chest tightened. It was like someone had hooked a bungee cord around my ribs and started pulling. I put the box down slowly, trying not to make a scene. My vision blurred for a second, and when I reached for the counter to steady myself, my hand missed, and I ended up on my knees. The sound of a glass clinking against the counter made me realize my mom had walked in. "Oh, for crying out loud," she said, as if I had just spilled juice on the carpet. "Cut the act, Alex. I'm not falling for whatever this is." I tried to respond, to tell her I couldn't breathe right, but the words wouldn't come out. My chest felt heavy, my throat was dry, and panic started to bubble up. That's when my aunt stepped in from the dining room, eyes already rolling. "Pathetic," she said with a little laugh. "Anything to skip chores, huh? What's next? Faking a broken leg because you don't want to carry plates?" They stood there, staring at me like I was putting on some ridiculous show. My mom actually crossed her arms and shook her head, and my aunt smirked like she was enjoying the performance. I could hear my cousins in the other room laughing at something on the TV, completely unaware that I was barely holding on. I wanted to scream that this wasn't an act, that something was seriously wrong, but my breath came in shallow gasps. I remember clutching the floor with one hand and trying to wave at them with the other, hoping they'd realize this wasn't fake. But their faces didn't change, Just that mix of irritation and amusement. The next thing I knew, my mom was telling me to get up and stop embarrassing myself because we had guests coming over soon. She even muttered something about how dramatic I'd been since I was a kid. My aunt laughed again and said, "If you're going to fake it, at least commit to the bit." I don't know how much time passed before my vision tunneled completely, but when I opened my eyes again, I was in the back seat of my mom's car. Apparently, she decided to take me to urgent care after my aunt convinced her that maybe it's an anxiety thing and they'll give him something to calm down. They hadn't even called an ambulance, just loaded me into the car like I was a stubborn teenager refusing to go to school. At the clinic, I was barely able to stand when we walked in. The nurse at the front desk took one look at me and called for someone in the back. Within a minute, I was in a wheelchair being rushed into an exam room. That's when the doctor came in, glanced at me, and started asking rapid-fire questions. How long I'd been feeling this way, whether I had any pre-existing conditions. I tried to answer, but every word felt like it cost me air I couldn't spare. Then they ran the scan, and I'll never forget the look on the doctor's face when the results popped up on the monitor. His whole expression dropped, and he turned to the nurse with this urgent tone I'd only ever heard in movies. "Prep for emergency surgery, now." My mom froze. My aunt stopped smirking, and I, despite the fog in my head, felt this strange mix of fear and vindication. For the first time in years, they weren't laughing. And that was just the beginning of what would become the breaking point in my relationship with my family. The next few hours were a blur of bright lights, masked faces, and the metallic smell of antiseptic. I remember the sting of and for being put in and the rush of a gurney down a hallway, my head bouncing slightly with each turn. At some point, the doctor explained that there was an internal blockage causing severe complications, life-threatening if not addressed immediately. I caught the words "close call" and "dangerous rupture," but the rest faded into a haze as the anesthesia pulled me under. When I woke up, it was in the hospital recovery ward. My throat was dry, my body heavy, but the pain was dulled, replaced with an unfamiliar stillness. I turned my head and saw my mom sitting in the corner, scrolling through her phone. My aunt was beside her, whispering something that made them both smirk. "Oh, look who's finally awake," my mom said, her voice flat. "You gave us quite a scare." The whole day got thrown off schedule. Thrown off schedule. Like my almost dying was an inconvenient hiccup in her weekend plans. "Yeah," my aunt added, leaning forward. "Your little stunt meant we had to cancel the dinner plans." Everyone was disappointed. I stared at them, trying to process if they were being serious. "Stunt," I croaked, my voice rough. My aunt shrugged. "Well, you know what I mean. You've always had a flair for the dramatic." The room was quiet for a moment except for the steady beep of the heart monitor. My mom sighed and stood up. "Anyway, the doctor said you'll be fine now. But you really need to work on not letting things get this bad. If you had told us you were feeling unwell earlier, maybe it wouldn't have come to this." It was as if the whole part where they ignored me while I was gasping for air didn't happen. They'd rewritten the story in their heads already, casting me as the one who'd caused the trouble by not speaking up enough. Over the next 2 days, while I was still hooked up to IVs and under observation, their visits were inconsistent. My mom came by twice a day, mostly to drop off some clothes or ask the nurses how soon I'd be discharged. My aunt came less often, but when she did, she brought her favorite pastime, snide commentary. One afternoon, I overheard her talking to my mom in the hallway. "You know, Sandra, maybe if Alex had taken better care of himself, we wouldn't be here. He's always been a bit fragile. Not like your other two." My other two. She meant my younger siblings, Jake and Emily. The golden children. Jake, the charismatic extrovert who never seemed to do wrong, and Emily, the perfect student with the spotless social media feed. My mom doted on them in ways I'd never experienced. If Jake so much as sneezed, she'd rush to his side with soup. If Emily had a stressful week at school, my mom would rearrange her whole schedule to help her decompress. But when it came to me, any problem I had was either self-inflicted or exaggerated. I lay there, listening, the sting of their words sharper than anything the needle had done to me. When Jake and Emily finally visited, it was almost worse. Emily gave me a polite hug, the kind you'd give a distant acquaintance, and asked, "So, how bad was it, really?" Jake didn't even sit down, just stood at the foot of the bed with his hands in his pockets. "Mom says you're fine now." "That's good." She was really stressed. Stressed. That word sat in my chest like a stone. My mother had been stressed because I almost died, but not in the way you'd think. She was stressed because she'd had to rearrange her weekend, cancel her plans, and deal with doctors instead of dinner guests. On the third night, while I was dozing off, I woke to hear my mom on the phone. She was laughing softly. No, he's okay now. Honestly, I think he just doesn't take care of himself. You know how he is, always in his own little world. The doctors made it sound dramatic, but I think it was blown out of proportion. I closed my eyes, my heart rate picking up. They'd downplayed everything. Even after the surgeon had told them how close I'd been to a fatal rupture, they'd twisted it into a narrative where I was careless and they were the ones inconvenienced. When I was discharged, there was no warmth, no sense of relief in their goodbyes, just to get some rest from my mom and a don't milk it too much from my aunt. We drove back to my mom's house in silence, the hum of the car engine the only sound. The next week was supposed to be about recovery, but at home, it became a constant drip of passive-aggressive remarks and little reminders that I'd scared everyone. My mom assigned me small chores to keep me moving despite the doctor's instructions to rest. My aunt dropped by unannounced, bringing up my hospital stay in that mocking tone, as though it were some over-the-top story I'd made up. The worst was the family dinner the following Friday. I'd barely been home a few days, still tired and sore, when my mom insisted I join. I sat quietly at the table, pushing food around my plate while everyone chatted. At one point, my aunt smirked and said, "Careful, Alex, don't choke. Your mom might not believe you this time." The table erupted in laughter. Jake slapped the table. Emily hid her giggle behind her hand. My mom just smiled like it was a harmless joke. I excused myself, my chest tight. Not from the surgery, but from the sheer weight of knowing they saw my near-death experience as nothing more than a punchline. That was the moment something shifted in me. I didn't know exactly how yet, but I decided right then that this dynamic was going to change. I was done playing the quiet, overlooked one who swallowed the hurt. I was done letting them define my story. They had no idea that my recovery time wasn't just going to be about healing. It was going to be about planning. And the first step was to keep my head down and let them think I was back to normal. Because if they thought I was the same Alex they'd always dismissed, they were in for a surprise. Recovery at my mom's house was never really recovery. It was walking on eggshells while being poked with a stick. I kept my head down, doing the light chores she assigned, even though the doctor had warned me to take it easy. I nodded along when my aunt stopped by to check in, but really just wanted to mine more jokes out of my hospital stay. On the surface, I let them think their version of the story had stuck, that I'd been careless, overdramatic, and that they'd been the ones dealing with the fallout. Inside, though, I was watching, listening, filing things away. About 2 weeks after I was discharged, I started to feel strong enough to walk into town. The air was crisp, and for the first time since the surgery, I felt like I could breathe without that ghost of heaviness in my chest. I almost convinced myself that maybe things would just settle, that maybe this could be a turning point where my family would, at the very least, stop making me the butt of every joke. That illusion lasted exactly 3 days. It started on a Thursday night. I came back from a short walk to find my mom and Jake at the kitchen table, both staring at something on my laptop. My laptop, which I'd left in my room, password protected. The lid was open, my files scattered across the screen. "What are you doing?" I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. My mom didn't even flinch. "We needed to check something." "On my laptop?" Jake smirked without looking up. "You should really use stronger passwords." I stepped forward, heart pounding. "That's my personal stuff. You can't just—" "We're family," my mom interrupted, as if that was an all-access pass to my private life. "Besides, you've been so secretive lately. I thought maybe you were hiding something we should know about." The pit in my stomach deepened. "What exactly are you looking for?" She clicked on a folder, my financial documents. "Pay stubs, invoices, bank records." "You've been doing better than you let on," she said, her voice cool and almost accusing. I froze. "Look at this," she continued, tilting the screen toward Jake. "No wonder he can afford to take time off work after surgery. He's been sitting on savings." Jake let out a low whistle. "Wow. And here I thought you were barely scraping by." My mom's tone shifted into that familiar mix of condescension and control. "You should have told me. I could have helped you manage it. You're not exactly known for making smart financial decisions." I stepped forward, closing the laptop gently but firmly. That's none of your business. But it was too late. The damage was done. I could see the wheels turning in her head. My financial privacy had been blown wide open, and the fact that she'd seen those numbers meant she'd start calculating ways to involve herself. The next day proved me right. Over breakfast, she casually mentioned that Emily was looking at graduate programs and might need some help covering tuition. "You've got that money just sitting there," she said. "It would be nice if you contributed to something meaningful for the family." I almost laughed, but the sound caught in my throat. "You're suggesting I pay for Emily's school?" "It's not a suggestion," she said, sipping her coffee. "It's what family does for each other." Jake jumped in. "Yeah, man. You don't have a mortgage or kids. You can afford it." I stared at them, stunned. "You do realize I just had major surgery, right? I might have follow-up expenses, recovery time. That's all behind you now." My mom cut in, her tone final. It was surreal. Not only had they invaded my privacy, but now they were positioning my savings as some kind of family resource they had the right to redistribute. Over the next few days, it escalated. Emily called me, all sweetness and light, thanking me in advance for considering helping with her tuition. When I told her I hadn't agreed to anything, she acted hurt, like I'd broken some unspoken promise. "I just thought you'd want to invest in my future," she said, her voice dripping with practiced innocence. By Sunday, the ask had transformed into an expectation. My mom had already told Emily to go ahead and start application fees because Alex is going to help. Jake was dropping hints about how nice it was that I was finally stepping up for the family. My aunt, of course, joined in from the sidelines, remarking how mature I'd become now that I was giving back. Giving back, as if I'd been taking from them my whole life instead of the other way around. But the real betrayal came that Monday morning. I logged into my bank account to check a scheduled bill payment, only to see a large transfer had already been made, several $1,000s, to Emily. The note on the transaction read, "Tuition start." I stared at the screen, my pulse thudding in my ears. I hadn't made the transfer. I hadn't even given Emily my account details. That meant someone in the house had done it, while I'd been recovering under their roof. And I knew exactly who. When I confronted my mom, she didn't even try to deny it. "I used the information from those documents on your laptop," she said, as if explaining where she'd found a spare key. "You weren't going to say yes, and this is important. You'll thank me later." Something in me snapped. It wasn't just the money. It was the casual way she admitted it, the complete disregard for my boundaries, the entitlement so deep it didn't even register as wrong in her mind. That was the moment I stopped thinking about whether I should push back and started thinking about how. Because now, it wasn't just about getting my money back. It was about making sure they understood, for the first time in their lives, that I wasn't theirs to control. And I was going to make sure they never forgot it. The morning after I discovered the transfer, I sat in my room staring at the ceiling, feeling like the walls had closed in on me. The air in my mother's house suddenly felt heavier, almost suffocating. Every creak in the hallway reminded me that someone here, my own family, had gone through my private documents, stolen from me, and justified it as if they were doing me a favor. The money wasn't just spare change sitting in my account. It was years of careful saving. Late nights freelancing after my day job, cutting back on little luxuries, turning down trips with friends so I could stay on track. That account wasn't a vault for the family to dip into. It was my safety net, my proof that I could survive on my own without having to crawl back to them. And now, a huge chunk of it was gone, funneled into Emily's future without my consent. That day, I stayed in my room with the door closed. I skipped lunch. I heard my mom knocking once, then her voice. "You can mope if you want, but the decision's made." No apology. Not even an acknowledgement that she'd crossed a line. When I finally dragged myself out of bed in the evening, my body still ached from the surgery. I made my way to the kitchen to get a glass of water and found my aunt at the table with a glass of wine. She looked me over, smirked, and said, "You should feel proud. Not everyone gets to send someone to grad school." I didn't respond. I didn't have the energy. I just went back to my room, shut the door, and sat in the dark. That night was the first time I truly understood what it meant to feel powerless. My mom had access to my personal life, my finances, my living space. I was still recovering physically, which meant I couldn't just pack a bag and leave without risking my health. I had nowhere else lined up to go. My lease had ended before the surgery, and I'd moved in temporarily, thinking it would be a safe place to heal. Now, I realized I'd walked into the lion's den without a way out. The days that followed blurred together. The passive-aggressive comments didn't stop. My mom talked about Emily's bright future over dinner like it was a family victory. Jake made jokes about how I was the quiet investor. My aunt kept dropping in with lines like, "Don't worry, you'll bounce back, unless you're planning to make another scene like in the kitchen that day." Each remark chipped away at me, but I started noticing something. The more I stayed quiet, the more they thought I was resigned to my role in all this. They mistook my silence for surrender. That's when a thought began to take root. I couldn't confront them head-on, not yet. I wasn't strong enough physically, and they'd just turn it into another overreaction to mock. But if I could bide my time, keep my head down while quietly preparing, I could make sure that when I did move, it wouldn't just be to get out. It would be to make sure they could never pull something like this again. I started small. I changed my online banking password from my phone. I opened a separate account at a different bank, transferring what remained of my savings into it. I began keeping important documents zipped inside my duffel bag instead of in the desk drawer. I even started storing small amounts of cash in a sealed envelope in the lining of my jacket, just in case I needed to leave in a hurry. At the same time, I began making mental notes of things I'd overhear. My mom bragging to a neighbor about managing the household finances. My aunt joking about knowing where all the bodies are buried. Jake mentioning that Emily's program still needed another semester's worth of funding. These weren't just idle words. They were threads I could pull when the time came. But even as I was setting the stage, the weight of what had happened didn't lift. There were moments late at night, when the house was quiet, that I'd lie awake and wonder if maybe they were right. Maybe I'd been foolish for keeping my savings a secret. Maybe it was my fault for leaving my laptop out. That's the thing about years of manipulation. You start to question whether you deserve the mistreatment. It was during one of those nights, staring at the faint glow of the streetlight outside my window, that I realized something. They counted on me doubting myself. They thrived on it. Every sarcastic jab, every rewriting of events, every time they turned my pain into a joke, it was all designed to keep me in place. And that was exactly why I had to get out. The problem was, leaving quietly wasn't enough. If I slipped away, they'd just rewrite this too. Tell everyone I'd been ungrateful, selfish, unreliable. I knew my mother well enough to know she'd paint herself as the victim, the selfless parent who took in her difficult child only to be abandoned. No, when I left, it had to be on my terms. And it had to make an impact, which meant I had to endure a little longer. Play the part. Let them think they still had the upper hand. Because when the moment came, I wasn't just walking away, I was taking something with me. And I already knew exactly where to start. In the weeks that followed, I slipped into a routine that, on the surface, looked like compliance. I did the chores my mom asked, showed up for the forced family dinners, even managed the occasional polite laugh when my aunt made her little hospital performance jokes. It was easier to let them believe I'd accepted my place in their hierarchy, quiet, passive, willing to be molded, than to give them any hint of what I was really doing. What they didn't see were the hours I spent late at night, propped up in bed with my laptop, quietly laying the groundwork for my escape and my comeback. I started taking on remote freelance projects again, small ones at first, to ease back into the workload while my body still healed. Then bigger ones. By the third week, I had a steady flow of income, more than enough to start replenishing what had been stolen. This time, every payment went straight into my new bank account, the one no one in that house knew existed. I also started reaching out to old contacts, former clients, colleagues, even a few friends I hadn't talked to in years. At first, it was just casual conversation, catching up. But slowly, I steered the talks toward opportunities. One friend in particular, Mark, mentioned that the small media company he worked for was looking for someone with my skill set. It was remote, well-paid, and offered flexible hours. Within a week, I'd interviewed and been offered the position. I didn't tell my family about the job. As far as they knew, I was still recovering and taking it easy with no real income. It was a strategic choice. The less they knew, the more they underestimated me. And I needed them to underestimate me if my eventual exit and payback was going to land the way I intended. Meanwhile, I started making quiet investments in myself. I bought a new phone and kept it locked with biometric security, something they couldn't bypass even if they tried. I purchased a fireproof lockbox and stored it in my duffel bag, keeping my passport, important papers, and a few high-value electronics inside. I began tracking every penny I spent and saved, watching the numbers climb steadily upward again. The best part was that my health was improving faster than I'd expected. The doctor cleared me for light exercise, and I took full advantage. I started walking every morning before the rest of the house woke up. By week 4, I was jogging short distances. My energy returned, my mind sharpened, and the fog I'd been living in since before the surgery began to lift. It was like I was reclaiming pieces of myself one by one. Pieces they didn't even know I had left. They still tried to control the narrative. My mom bragged to neighbors about how she was taking care of me while I got back on my feet. My aunt would wink and say things like, "Don't worry, we'll keep you from blowing through your savings again," as though they'd done me some great financial service. Jake and Emily seemed to think I was just quietly licking my wounds, waiting for my next family contribution. And honestly, I let them think all of it. I smiled when my mom talked about me being so much calmer now. I shrugged off Jake's comments about how nice it is you're staying home more. I even pretended to take my aunt's advice on budgeting, because the more they thought I was tame, the less they'd suspect I was building an entirely new life right under their noses. A month and a half after the surgery, I signed the lease on a small but modern apartment in a part of town they never visited. It wasn't much, but it was mine, paid for with my own money, furnished with a mix of things I'd kept in storage and a few carefully chosen new pieces. I didn't move in right away. Instead, I kept paying rent on it while still staying at my mom's house, making trips there under the guise of meeting friends. In reality, I was stocking the kitchen, setting up my workspace, and making it fully livable before the day I officially disappeared from their home. During this time, I also started gathering information, not in a malicious, digging through their trash way, but in the way you do when you're preparing for a chess match. I noticed my mom kept all her important documents in an unlocked filing cabinet in her bedroom. I learned from overhearing Jake that he'd been bragging about a side hustle that didn't sound entirely legal. My aunt, after a couple of glasses of wine one night, let slip that she'd been claiming certain family expenses on her taxes, expenses that were, in reality, personal luxuries. I didn't act on any of it right away, but I kept it all stored neatly in my mind, knowing there might come a time when those details would be useful. With each passing week, I felt less like the cornered, powerless version of myself they'd grown comfortable with, and more like the person I'd been before years of family manipulation wore me down, except stronger. Smarter. I wasn't just regaining control, I was quietly gaining leverage. They had no idea that the helpless patient eating dinner at their table was now running a steady income stream, had his own apartment ready, and was sitting on a growing list of the kind of family secrets that could shift the power dynamic forever. And then, just as everything was lining up, they gave me the perfect opportunity to put my plan into motion. It came in the form of a family announcement, one they thought would pull me deeper into their web. But all it did was open the door for my revenge to begin. It was a Sunday afternoon when the family announcement happened. I was sitting at the dining table with my laptop open, pretending to browse for freelance work while actually reviewing my bank transfers for the month. My mom walked in with that particular kind of smile she gets when she's about to tell you something that's less an update and more a declaration of how your life is going to be involved, whether you like it or not. "Family meeting," she said, clapping her hands lightly. Jake and Emily wandered in from the living room, my aunt trailing behind them with her ever-present wine glass. I closed my laptop and sat back, masking my suspicion with a neutral face. Emily was the one who started. So, I got accepted into my top graduate program. She beamed like a bride revealing her engagement ring. "It's in the city, 2 years, amazing faculty. This is huge for me." I smiled politely. "Congratulations." She nodded graciously, then glanced at my mom, who took over. "Here's the thing. Emily's tuition is higher than we thought. Plus, she'll need to live close to campus. The program is intense, so she can't work much while she's in it. That means we're going to need to pitch in as a family to make it happen." I already knew where this was going. I kept my expression blank. "And by we, you mean me?" My mom tilted her head, as if she couldn't believe I'd be so blunt. "Well, you're in a good position right now. You're not tied down with kids or a mortgage. It's just logical." Jake leaned in with a smirk. Think of it as an investment. Emily gets her degree, makes more money later, and maybe she helps you out in return. My aunt chimed in. Besides, you've been doing so well lately, haven't you? You seem comfortable. They didn't know how right they were, but for all the wrong reasons. I had the means now, yes, but not to fund Emily's dream. That money was earmarked for something far more important, freedom and payback. Let's not decide anything today, I said evenly. I'll think about it. What I didn't say was that I'd already decided, and it wasn't going to be what they wanted. The conversation, however, gave me a piece of information that shifted everything. Emily's program required her to move into the city in just a few months, which meant there would be leases, deposits, contracts, things that required credit checks, bank transfers, and financial records. If my mother had been willing to steal from me once to get her way, there was no reason she wouldn't try to meddle again, especially if she thought she could smooth the process for Emily by using my information or resources without permission. I needed to make sure that, by the time those months rolled around, any attempt to touch my finances would backfire spectacularly. So I started laying the groundwork. First, I scheduled a quiet meeting with my bank manager. I explained, in calm, measured tones, that I had reason to believe a family member might try to access my accounts without my consent. The manager was sympathetic and suggested adding multiple layers of security, new PINs, verbal passcodes, and a flag on the account requiring in-person verification for any large transfers. I also opened a high-security savings account that couldn't be accessed online at all, only in person, with ID and biometric confirmation. Second, I began gathering every shred of documentation I could find about my finances, my work contracts, and my new apartment lease. These went into the fireproof lockbox, along with my passport and personal electronics. The lockbox itself went into my apartment, not in my room at my mom's house, so there was nothing physical they could rifle through even if they tried. Third, I quietly spoke to a lawyer. Not about suing them, yet, but about understanding my options if they ever tried something like the unauthorized transfer again. The lawyer gave me advice on documenting interactions, securing proof, and setting up alerts on my credit to catch any attempts at fraud. But the most important move came from a different angle entirely. A week after the family meeting, I got a call from Mark at the media company I'd started working with. He was impressed with my work and wanted to offer me a bigger role, managing a small team of freelancers. It would mean more money, but also more flexibility. And here's the kicker. It would occasionally require me to host client meetings or small events in the city. That was my in. By accepting the role, I now had a legitimate reason to be in the city regularly, and to be in spaces my family never saw. It meant I could slowly move more of my belongings to the apartment without suspicion. It also gave me access to a broader network of people outside of my family's reach, who could be allies if I needed them. With each passing week, my position grew stronger. My income was steady, my resources secure, my exit strategy nearly complete. And best of all, my family still thought I was floating along, dependent on their goodwill. The day they realized how wrong they were was getting closer. And when it came, it wouldn't just be a quiet exit. It would be a clean break, so sharp they'd never be able to stitch the narrative back together in their favor. And without realizing it, they just handed me the final tool I needed to make that happen. The timing had to be perfect. Too early, and they'd find a way to twist it. Too late, and I risked them getting their hands on something else of mine. I decided that the moment to strike would be right before Emily's big move to the city for grad school. That was when they'd be most distracted, most financially stretched, and least able to react without showing their true colors to outsiders. The weeks leading up to it, I played my part flawlessly. I offered to help Emily research apartments. I sat through family dinners where my mom dropped hints about how generous Alex is going to be. I even went with Emily to tour a couple of places, letting her think I might co-sign something for her. All the while, I was quietly setting up the pieces for what would look to them like a spontaneous collapse, but would actually be the final move in a long game. Step 1 was removing any direct access they had to my personal or financial information. I'd already locked down my bank accounts and moved my documents, but I went a step further. I changed my phone number and set up a P.O. box in the city. Every important contact, bank, employer, lawyer, got my new number and address. My mom and the rest of them still had the old number, which I was now using only as a decoy. Step 2 was controlling the narrative. I quietly reached out to a few extended family members, people my mom loved to brag to, but who didn't know the full picture. I told them, in a careful, measured way, about my upcoming move for work and how I was sad to be leaving my mom's place so soon after she took care of me. The phrasing was deliberate. It made me sound grateful while planting the idea that I'd been independent in the decision. Step 3 was setting the trap. A week before Emily's move, my mom brought up the financial contribution again over dinner, saying, "We'll need to transfer the first few months of rent next Monday." She said it casually, as if it were a foregone conclusion. That was exactly what I'd been waiting for. On Sunday evening, I went to my apartment in the city, bringing the last of my belongings from storage. I set up my workspace, stocked the fridge, and left a spare key with a trusted friend nearby. By the time I returned to my mom's that night, the only things left in my old room were a couple of boxes filled with cheap, replaceable items. Monday morning, right on schedule, my mom knocked on my door with her laptop. "All right, let's get that transfer done." I sat up in bed, stretching lazily. "About that, I can't." Her eyebrows knitted together. "What do you mean you can't? You agreed to this." "I never agreed," I said calmly. "And even if I wanted to, you wouldn't be able to touch my accounts anymore. They're secured." Her face darkened, but before she could speak, I added, "Also, I'm moving out today." The silence in the room was so sharp, it was almost comical. "What?" she snapped. I stood up, pulled my phone from my pocket, and showed her the lease agreement on the screen. "I've had a place in the city for 2 months. Fully furnished. Paid for in advance. I start a new position this week, and I won't need anything from you." My aunt, who had been lingering in the hallway with her morning coffee, let out a sharp laugh. "So you've been hiding this? All this time?" "Yep," I said, slipping on my jacket. "And before you start telling people I abandoned you, I've already spoken to Aunt Linda, Uncle Rob, and a few others about how grateful I am for the time here. They'll know exactly how I tell it." My mom's lips pressed into a thin line. "After everything we've done for you." I cut her off with a small, satisfied smile. "After everything you've taken from me, you mean?" I let that hang in the air just long enough before adding, "By the way, the bank is aware of the unauthorized transfer you made last time. If anything like that happens again, they're prepared to take legal action." Her eyes widened, and for once, she had no quick retort. I grabbed my duffel bag, the one with nothing but cheap filler items, and walked past them both. At the front door, I paused. "Oh, and Emily, I hope you've got your rent sorted. You'll need it sooner than you think." The beauty of it was that I didn't have to touch her move directly. Because of my quiet work behind the scenes, the moment my mom tried to use my info for her lease, the system would block her and flag her attempt. Emily would be left scrambling, and there'd be no way to pin it on me without revealing exactly what my mom had done. By the time they figured it all out, I'd be long gone, living in my own place, working my new job, surrounded by people who actually respected me. And they'd be left with nothing but each other, and the knowledge that they'd underestimated me for the last time. 2 weeks after I walked out of my mother's house, I got the first call. It was Emily. I let it go to voicemail, partly because I was in a meeting, but mostly because I already had a good idea what it was about. When I checked the message later, her voice was tight, almost panicked. "Alex, they're saying I can't sign the lease because the co-signer's credit check failed. Mom said she used your info. What did you do?" I didn't respond. The next day, my aunt tried. This time it was less panic and more fury. "So this is your big revenge, huh? Making your sister homeless." I deleted the voicemail without even listening to the rest. The third call came from my mom herself, and I picked up, not to explain, but because I wanted to hear it in her voice. She didn't waste time. "You've made things very difficult for Emily. She's had to settle for a tiny place miles from campus, and now she's behind on applications because of the delay." I kept my tone even. "You made things difficult for yourself. You touched my accounts without permission. Twice. Actions have consequences." She tried to recover, her voice softening in that manipulative way she'd always used when she wanted to reel me back in. "We're family, Alex. We should be helping each other." I almost laughed. "Funny. That's exactly what I did. Helped you understand boundaries." There was a long pause on her end before she said, "People will think you're cruel." I smiled to myself. "Only if you tell them the whole story, and we both know you won't." I hung up before she could answer. Word traveled quickly through the extended family, but thanks to the conversations I'd had before leaving, Most people already saw me as the independent one striking out on my own. The version my mom and aunt tried to spread, painting me as ungrateful, didn't gain much traction. In fact, a few relatives reached out to tell me they admired how I'd gotten out on my own terms. Meanwhile, I settled into my apartment fully. My work with the media company thrived. Within months, I had doubled my client list and started mentoring newer freelancers. My health was the best it had been in years, my savings growing steadily in an account no one could touch. I still saw my family occasionally, at larger gatherings where avoiding them completely would have raised eyebrows. But the dynamic had shifted. They no longer made jokes about the hospital or treated me like the perpetual underdog. They kept their distance, their smiles just a bit too tight, their conversations with me short and surface level. And that was exactly how I wanted it. The final nail came at a cousin's wedding 6 months later. I arrived in a tailored suit, confident, with a few colleagues turned friends in tow. My mom approached, clearly about to launch into small talk, when Emily walked up behind her. I caught a glimpse of the bitterness in Emily's eyes before she looked away. "How's school?" I asked lightly. "It's fine," she muttered. "Just a lot of commuting." I gave her a warm, polite smile. "Well, I'm glad you figured it out." Then I excused myself and went back to my table, leaving them standing there. As I sat down, I felt the tension loosen in my chest. I had my life, my independence, my dignity. They had their gossip, their grudges, and their empty seats at the tables they thought they could control. For years, they'd laughed when I was on the floor, gasping for air. Now, I was the one standing tall, while they were left choking on their own pride. My name's Tim, and I just turned 27. Birthdays were never a big deal in my family, at least not for me. My younger sister, Rachel, always had grand celebrations, balloons, a catered cake, even a slideshow one year. My older brother, Eric, got the same treatment. Expensive gifts, heartfelt toasts, and the kind of attention that makes you feel like the center of the universe. Me? My birthdays usually slipped by with a card, maybe a pair of socks, and a family dinner where I felt more like an afterthought than the guest of honor. But this year was different. This year they decided to celebrate me in a way I'll never forget. It happened at the family house, the same old colonial-style place I grew up in. The living room was decorated with half-hearted streamers and a store-bought cake that still had the price tag on the plastic cover. I noticed little details like that, because when you've spent most of your life being the overlooked sibling, you learn to pick up on the small ways people show, or don't show, that they care. Rachel sat on the couch scrolling on her phone. Eric was telling some story about work, and my mom was fussing over the food like she always does. Dad sat at the head of the room, watching everything with that calculating look he often carried, like he was silently grading us. When it came time for gifts, Rachel handed me a mug with some sarcastic slogan about "world's okayest brother." Eric didn't bother hiding his smirk as he gave me a used book, the spine cracked and pages yellowed, clearly pulled off his own shelf at the last minute. I told myself not to care, not to let it get under my skin. But then Dad stood up, reached into his jacket pocket, and handed me an envelope. For a second, I let myself hope. Maybe this time would be different. Maybe, just maybe, he had actually gotten me something thoughtful. I tore it open, only to find it completely empty. No card, no money, not even a note. Just a blank piece of paper inside, folded once. The room fell quiet for a beat before Dad leaned back in his chair and said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "A man who can't pay his own bills doesn't deserve gifts." His words cut through me sharper than any insult ever had. My chest tightened, my ears rang, and I could feel the blood rushing to my face. Rachel laughed first, then Eric joined in. Even Mom chuckled nervously, muttering something about tough love. I stood there frozen, envelope still in my hand, humiliated in front of the very people who were supposed to have my back. The truth was, I had been struggling financially. I'd picked up part-time work while finishing night classes, and the bills were stacking higher than I wanted to admit. Dad knew that. He always kept track of our lives like an accountant tallying up debts and failures, and he loved nothing more than to call me out. But what none of them knew, not Dad, not Rachel, not Eric, was that I had been keeping a secret, one that would change everything, one that I was saving for the right moment, when their laughter and smugness would turn to stunned silence. But in that moment, all I could do was stand there, envelope in hand, pretending like their laughter didn't bother me, pretending like I wasn't crumbling inside. I forced a smile, nodded, and sat down at the table as if nothing had happened. Inside, though, something shifted. I realized this wasn't just another forgotten birthday. This was a turning point. They thought I was powerless, the struggling son, the overlooked sibling. What they didn't know was that I had been preparing something that would flip the balance of power completely. And as I sat there watching Rachel clink glasses with Eric and Dad bask in his own cruel little joke, I promised myself their laughter wouldn't last forever. I sat there at the table, trying to swallow my pride along with the lukewarm slice of cake they had plopped on a paper plate in front of me. My birthday cake, and yet no one even asked if I wanted to blow out candles. The sugary frosting stuck to my teeth as I forced myself to chew, pretending like Dad's comment hadn't gutted me. But once you've been humiliated like that in front of your own family, you start noticing every little jab that follows, every smirk, every dismissive glance. It was like they had all silently agreed that my birthday wasn't a celebration. It was a stage for my ridicule. Eric leaned back in his chair, running his hand over the shiny new watch on his wrist. I knew that watch. It was the one Dad had gifted him just last month after Eric landed some mid-level promotion at his company. He made sure to stretch his arm across the table so everyone could see the way it caught the light. "Crazy how some people get rewarded for hard work," he said casually, eyes flicking toward me. Rachel giggled into her phone, not even pretending to hide her amusement. Then Mom, in her typical way of trying to keep the peace, piped up, "Tim, you know, if you were more like your brother, things would come easier for you." Her voice was soft, almost apologetic, but the words hit me harder than if she'd screamed them. I wanted to ask her what she thought I was doing, working nights, dragging myself to class, trying to build something for myself. But what was the point? To her, Eric's office job and Rachel's carefully curated social media presence were achievements worth celebrating. My efforts, invisible as they were, never made the cut. Rachel took it a step further, holding up her phone to show the table. "Look at all the likes I got on my latest post." It was a picture of her at some rooftop party, champagne glass in hand, flashing a rehearsed smile. "My followers are growing so fast. I might hit 10,000 this week." Dad actually clapped. "That's what I'm talking about," he said, beaming at her like she'd just won an Olympic medal. "Building a real brand for yourself. That's ambition." Then his eyes landed back on me, and his smile thinned into something colder. "Not everyone here has that kind of drive." The heat rose in my chest again, but I swallowed it. I had to. If I showed even a flicker of anger, they'd only twist it into more proof of my supposed immaturity. After dinner, Rachel and Eric gathered near the couch, laughing over old stories. Most of them were about me, embarrassing moments from my childhood dragged back into the spotlight like party tricks. The time I froze during a school play, the time I lost my wallet at the fair, the time I spilled soda all over the car seat. "Classic Tim," Eric said, shaking his head like he was recounting the antics of a bumbling cartoon character. "Some things never change." Dad chuckled along, sipping his drink. "And that's why we give tough love. You can't coddle someone forever. Look where it gets them." His eyes cut to me again, daring me to argue. But the cruelest moment came when Mom pulled out the family photo album. She flipped through the glossy pages, pointing out pictures of Eric in his graduation gown, Rachel in her cheerleading uniform, both of them beaming, surrounded by family. When she came to a picture of me, a much younger version of myself holding a science fair ribbon, she hesitated before saying, "Oh, I remember this. We tried so hard to support you, Tim, but you never really kept up with it, did you?" It was like every page was proof that I had always been the odd one out, the one whose accomplishments weren't worth remembering, the one whose efforts were just temporary phases that led nowhere. That night, as I sat in the corner of the living room while the rest of my family crowded around Rachel's phone to watch a video of her latest trip, something solidified inside me. Their favoritism wasn't new, but the blatant disrespect, the humiliation, the way they laughed at my expense, it had crossed into something sharper, something intolerable. They thought they could pile it on me forever because I'd always taken it silently. But what they didn't know was that silence doesn't mean weakness. Sometimes silence means patience. Sometimes it means preparation. And I had been preparing for longer than they realized. The night of my birthday should have ended there. Humiliation, laughter at my expense, and me quietly retreating to lick my wounds. But my family has a way of taking things too far, of pushing past the line you think they won't cross. That was the night I realized it wasn't just favoritism or casual cruelty. It was betrayal. After the cake was cleared and the dishes piled up in the sink, Dad gathered us in the living room again. He had that serious look, the one he used when he thought he was delivering life lessons. "All right, everyone," he started, clapping his hands together. "Time to talk about responsibility." Eric groaned playfully, Rachel rolled her eyes, but I sat up straighter. Something about the way Dad said it made my stomach tighten. He looked at me. "Tim, you're still living here rent-free, aren't you?" The words landed heavy. "For now," I said carefully, "but I'm picking up more shifts." "I've told you." Dad cut me off with a sharp wave of his hand. "Excuses. You're 27 years old, and your siblings are out there making something of themselves. Meanwhile, you sit here eating our food, using our water, our electricity, without pulling your weight." My face flushed. "I contribute what I can. I pay for groceries sometimes." Rachel laughed, leaning against the couch cushions. "Groceries? Oh, please, one bag of chips and a frozen pizza doesn't count." Eric piled on. "Yeah, man, you're basically a tenant who doesn't pay rent. If it were up to me, you'd have been kicked out already." That's when Dad dropped the bomb. "Funny you say that, Eric. Because starting next month, Tim will pay rent. $800. The air left my lungs. $800? For a single room in the house I grew up in? I stammered. Dad, that's more than I can afford right now. You know I'm juggling classes and work. $800 is fair," he snapped. "Life isn't about what you can afford, Tim. It's about what you make happen. And if you can't, then maybe this house isn't the right place for you." Rachel clapped her hands together dramatically. "Finally, maybe I can move my stuff into his room. It's bigger." She said it like it was a joke, but the glint in her eyes told me she meant every word. Mom, as usual, tried to soften the blow, but in the worst way possible. "It's good for you, Tim. Pressure makes diamonds. Maybe this will finally light a fire under you." They didn't see it, but my hands were trembling in my lap. Not out of fear, out of rage. The people who were supposed to support me weren't just mocking me anymore. They were scheming to shove me out, to strip me of the little stability I had left. $800 wasn't about responsibility. It was about control. About reminding me that in their eyes, I was the failure. But the real betrayal came a few days later. I found out, purely by accident, that the rent Dad demanded wasn't even going toward the house. He had told Rachel and Eric it was a plan to funnel money into their futures. Rachel's travel fund, Eric's car loan. My so-called rent wasn't about teaching me responsibility. It was about taking what little I had and handing it over to the golden children. When I overheard Rachel bragging to a friend on the phone about how Dad was going to use Tim's rent to help her fly out to a friend's destination wedding, something inside me snapped. That was the moment I realized they weren't just dismissing me, they were using me. I felt sick, betrayed, angry in a way that rattled me to the core. And as I sat there in my room that night, staring at the empty envelope Dad had given me for my birthday, I knew this wasn't something I could let slide. They thought they had humiliated me for the last time. What they didn't realize was that this betrayal had pushed me past my breaking point, and I wasn't going to stay silent anymore. I wish I could say I stormed out that night, slammed the door, and never looked back. That would have been the dramatic thing to do. But the truth is, when you've lived under someone's thumb for so long, it's not that easy. The betrayal sat heavy on me, but so did the reality of my situation. I didn't have enough saved to move out, and I didn't want to quit school when I was this close to finishing. So instead of leaving, I stayed and endured. The next few weeks were some of the hardest I've ever lived through. Every day felt like I was suffocating under their constant reminders that I wasn't good enough. Dad made a habit of leaving rent reminders stuck to my door, little notes with the amount due circled in red ink, as if I could forget. Rachel would walk past my room humming, $800, like it was some kind of taunt. Eric just smirked whenever we crossed paths, like he was already picturing the car payment he'd make with my money. I tried to keep my head down, but it got worse. One evening at dinner, Dad asked if I had the first month's rent ready. When I admitted I was short, he pushed back from the table, shaking his head like I was a disgrace. "See, this is why you'll never get ahead," he said, loud enough that Rachel filmed the whole exchange on her phone, laughing. Mom didn't stop her. She just told me I had to learn the hard way. I went to bed that night staring at the ceiling, the same ceiling I'd stared at as a kid when I couldn't sleep. Back then, it felt like home. Now it felt like a cage. The lowest point came when I checked my bank account and realized I had less than $200 to my name. Between tuition, gas, and food, I was stretched so thin that the idea of handing over $800 made my stomach twist. I skipped meals some days just to scrape a little more together. Meanwhile, Rachel was posting pictures from a new shopping spree, tagging Dad in her captions with little heart emojis. Eric had new tires put on his car. I didn't need to ask where the money was coming from. I started avoiding the family altogether, retreating to my room whenever I could. They noticed. Dad accused me of being antisocial. Mom told me I was sulking. What they didn't realize was that in that silence, I was thinking, planning. Every night, I'd sit at my desk with my laptop open, working late into the night on something none of them knew about. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't something I could show off like Rachel's Instagram or Eric's watch. But it was mine. I poured every ounce of energy into it, fueled by the sting of their betrayal. And when I wasn't working on that, I was making quiet moves in the background, canceling little services they'd signed up in my name, reorganizing the things I had tucked away in old folders, making calls that no one in the house knew about. Bit by bit, I was pulling away from their grip, even if they didn't see it yet. Still, it was lonely. Rock bottom isn't just about money. It's about feeling like you have no one in your corner. At night, I'd think back to all the times I tried to make them proud. The science fair ribbon, the scholarships I applied for, the small achievements that were brushed off because they didn't measure up to my siblings. It hurt in a way I can't put into words. Like my entire existence in this family had been reduced to the role of the failure, the scapegoat, the punchline. But the funny thing about hitting rock bottom is that once you're there, the only direction left is up. And somewhere between the sleepless nights, the humiliation, and the quiet planning, I realized something. They had no idea what I was capable of. They thought they'd back me into a corner. But what they didn't know was that I'd been quietly building a way out, and maybe even a way to turn the tables on them entirely. It's strange how quickly things can shift once you decide you're done being the family doormat. For weeks, I lived with the constant pressure of Dad's rent demands and my siblings' smug laughter. But in the background, I kept pouring myself into my own project, the thing no one in that house even suspected. I had been freelancing online in my spare time, picking up small jobs, copywriting, website work, and a little digital marketing. It wasn't glamorous, and the pay at first was barely enough to cover groceries, but I'd been steadily building a small client base. At first, it was just a way to make ends meet while balancing school, but the more I worked, the more I realized I had stumbled onto something that could grow far beyond a side gig. I leaned into it. Instead of doom scrolling when Rachel flaunted her influencer lifestyle on social media, I studied courses on SEO and branding. While Eric bragged about his new client dinners, I built my own portfolio from scratch, piece by piece. Every late night at my laptop, fueled by bitterness and determination, started to pay off. The first real break came when a client I'd worked with on a small website redesign recommended me to someone bigger, a local business owner who needed a full marketing overhaul. The paycheck from that job alone was more than what Dad demanded for rent. For the first time in a long time, I felt the power shift slightly in my direction. Of course, I didn't tell my family. Not yet. Outwardly, I stayed quiet, still the failure in their eyes. Rachel laughed when she saw me glued to my laptop. "What are you even doing in there?" "Playing games," she teased, shaking her head. Eric added, "Yeah, you'll never get anywhere clicking away like that." Dad just gave me his usual disappointed sigh, as if my very existence was proof of wasted potential. But behind closed doors, I was changing. I opened a new savings account, one they didn't know about, and started funneling every extra dollar into it. Watching the balance climb, even slowly, was like watching my own freedom take shape. Opportunities kept coming. A freelance contract turned into a retainer, then another referral. I started waking up before dawn just to fit in more work before classes. My exhaustion was real, but so was my momentum. The weight of their betrayal no longer felt crushing. It felt like fuel. And then something unexpected happened. I got a message from a small startup that had seen my work. They wanted me to manage their entire online campaign. It wasn't just a gig. It was steady income, almost triple what I'd been making at my part-time job. That's when it clicked. I didn't need their approval, their gifts, their cruel lessons about responsibility. I was building my own safety net, one they couldn't touch. The irony is that even as I was rising, they kept treating me the same. At dinner one night, Dad brought up my rent again. You better not be short this time, he warned, glaring across the table. Rachel smirked, already counting the money in her head. Eric casually mentioned how he'd soon be paying off his car, thanks to the family's support. The words stung, but only for a moment, because I knew something they didn't. For the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of their threats. If Dad kicked me out tomorrow, I'd land on my feet. If Rachel sneered or Eric gloated, I had the means to walk away without looking back. That quiet power hummed inside me like a secret they couldn't see. And the more they tried to push me down, the more I realized how blind they were. They thought they were tightening the noose around me. In reality, I was already slipping free and preparing to pull it tight around them instead. By the time spring rolled around, I was a different person than the one who sat humiliated at that birthday table. My savings account had grown enough to cover several months of living expenses. My freelance work had doubled, then tripled, to the point where I no longer needed to rely on my part-time job. Quietly, I had reached a place of stability, something I had never tasted before. But with that stability came something else, perspective. I started noticing just how dependent my family was on me, in ways they probably didn't even realize. For years, they'd kept me in the failure role, but they also relied on me to pick up their slack. I was the one who handled small tech problems around the house, who fixed Dad's endless printer issues, who showed Mom how to reset her online accounts. I was the one Rachel begged to edit her Instagram captions when she wanted them to sound more polished, and the one Eric called when he needed his resume updated to look impressive. They all looked down on me, but when they needed something done, I was their go-to. That's when the first real opportunity for revenge presented itself. Rachel barged into my room one evening, waving her phone. "Tim, help me. My flight booking glitched, and now I can't confirm my ticket for next month's wedding. You know this stuff, fix it." She didn't even say please. I almost laughed. The very ticket she wanted to book was for the trip funded partly by the so-called rent Dad was forcing me to pay. Then, a week later, Eric cornered me in the kitchen with his laptop. "Hey, can you redo this resume? I've got an interview coming up for a new position, and I need it to look sharp. You're good with words, right?" He said it like a command, not a request. Even Dad, who prided himself on never needing anyone, came to me one night with an envelope of paperwork. "You're good with computers. Help me organize these tax files. I don't have time to figure out all this online nonsense." I nodded silently, taking mental notes. For the first time, it hit me. They needed me more than they admitted. They had made me feel small, but they leaned on me constantly. That dependency, that blind assumption I'd always be there to clean up their mess, was power. And power, when handled carefully, could turn into leverage. At the same time, my own projects were giving me even more footing. The startup I'd taken on expanded my role, inviting me into strategy meetings. They trusted my ideas, implemented my campaigns, and openly praised my results. I wasn't just another freelancer anymore. I was becoming indispensable to them. And in that growth, I started to see a bigger picture. I opened an LLC for my freelance work. It felt surreal, signing the paperwork, officially becoming a business owner. It was more than just a name, it was a shield. It meant my earnings, my accounts, my contracts were legally mine, untouchable by anyone else. The same family that had laughed at me for being broke had no clue that while they were mocking me, I was laying down the foundation for independence and for revenge. The turning point came late one night when I was digging through old documents on the family computer. I stumbled across files Dad had left open, financial spreadsheets, budgets, even some credit card statements. Out of curiosity, I skimmed them, and my jaw dropped. The family finances weren't nearly as stable as Dad made them seem. Credit card debt was piling up. Eric's new tires had been paid for with a cash advance. Rachel's flights were on the family card, not fully covered by Dad's income. That's when it clicked. Not only did they rely on me for the small things, they were also living in a financial house of cards. And they had no idea how fragile it all was. I sat back in my chair, heart racing, a dozen thoughts colliding at once. They thought they were in control, thought they could mock me into submission, bleed me dry, and still hold all the power. But they didn't see what I saw. They didn't realize how much I already knew, and how much more I could do with it. For the first time, I didn't feel like the overlooked sibling anymore. I felt like someone sitting on a secret weapon. And the best part? They had no idea I was holding it. I didn't rush my revenge. That's the part most people get wrong. They want the satisfaction right away. But I knew my family too well. They thrived on control, on belittling me when I was vulnerable. If I struck too soon, they'd just find a way to twist it, to make me the villain again. No, I needed to be patient. Precise. I needed them to walk right into it. The setup was easy. They had already shown me their weaknesses. Rachel with her desperate need to show off, Eric with his dependence on looking impressive, and Dad with his obsession with responsibility, while secretly drowning in debt. All I had to do was give each of them just enough rope to hang themselves. Rachel was first. A week before her big trip, she came into my room in a panic. "Tim, I can't get my ticket to confirm again. The airline says the payment didn't go through. Fix it for me, please." She shoved her phone at me like I was her personal assistant. I took it calmly, scanning the screen, then shook my head. "Looks like the card's been declined," I said deadpan. Her face paled. "That's impossible. Dad promised me it was covered." I handed the phone back. "Well, maybe check with Dad. I can't fix what's not there." What she didn't know was that I had already seen the statements. The family card was maxed out. There was no way that flight was getting booked without cash up front. And when she stormed to Dad, yelling about how she needed the ticket, I sat in my room listening to the argument unfold. Dad's voice, raised and frustrated, Rachel's shrill accusations. Eventually, the house went quiet, and I smiled to myself. One down. Eric came next. He emailed me his resume draft and demanded, "Make it look professional by tomorrow. I need this job." I opened the file and stared at it for a while. Instead of editing it, I forwarded it exactly as it was. Typos, clunky sentences, all, to the application portal he'd asked me to upload it to. When he didn't get a call back, he raged around the house, blaming the company for not recognizing talent. I stayed silent, my laptop glowing softly as I worked on yet another marketing campaign that would pay me more than Eric's dream job ever could. And then came Dad, the man who had humiliated me with an empty envelope, who had demanded rent only to funnel it into Rachel and Eric's lives. He was the hardest to get to because he never admitted weakness. But I didn't need him to. His finances spoke for him. Tax season arrived, and once again he shoved the envelope of documents at me. "Organize these. File it online. You know how useless I am with all this." I took the papers without a word, retreating to my room. And that's when I saw it. Discrepancies everywhere. Unpaid balances, overdraft fees, even an old notice of delinquency buried in the stack. He had been keeping up appearances, but the reality was a crumbling facade. I didn't expose it right away. Instead, I filed everything neatly, saved copies to my own drive, and waited. Because when the right moment came, I wanted to be ready, not just to embarrass him, but to dismantle the entire illusion of control he lorded over me. The final stroke came when Dad called another family meeting. He sat us all down in the living room and announced, "From now on, Tim's rent will go directly into the family account. It's about accountability." He said it with that smug smirk, as if this was his masterstroke. Rachel clapped her hands. Eric nodded. Mom gave me that pitying look. But this time, I didn't bite my tongue. I leaned back in my chair, calm as could be, and said, "Actually, about that." All their heads turned. My heart was pounding, but my voice was steady. "I've been making some changes. Opened my own business, built my own savings. I don't need to hand over anything to a family account that's already maxed out and drowning in debt." The silence was immediate, thick, suffocating. Dad's face went red. "What are you talking about?" I pulled out my laptop, turned it toward them, and showed them the files. Every debt, every overdraft fee, every late notice, all organized neatly. "You've been living off credit for years. And you thought bleeding me dry would fix it? No, not anymore." Rachel gasped. Eric sputtered. Mom covered her mouth. Dad tried to speak, but no words came out. For the first time in my life, I saw fear in his eyes. I closed the laptop slowly, savoring the moment. "You wanted accountability? Fine. But from now on, you'll answer for yourselves." And then I stood, calm and collected, while the room sat in stunned silence. Their empire of control, built on humiliation and manipulation, had cracked wide open. The silence after I closed my laptop was unlike anything I had ever experienced in that house. For years, the living room had been a stage where I was mocked, dismissed, and used as the family scapegoat. But now it felt like a courtroom, and I was the judge who had just delivered the verdict. Dad was the first to break. His face, usually so composed in its smug superiority, crumbled into something raw and panicked. "Where did you get those numbers?" he demanded, though his voice shook. He knew the answer. He just couldn't admit that his own carelessness had betrayed him. "I've lived here long enough to see everything," I said calmly. "And I've had to clean up enough of your messes to know exactly how deep it runs." Rachel, wide-eyed, looked between us. "Wait, you're saying Dad's broke? But what about my trip? You promised." "Promise." I cut her off, my voice sharper now. "Rachel, those promises were made on borrowed money. The only reason you got half the things you brag about online is because Dad shoved it on a card he couldn't afford. And you laughed at me for being broke? At least I didn't finance my life with debt I'll never be able to pay back." Her mouth snapped shut. For once, there was no comeback, no smug little laugh. Eric tried to jump in, his voice louder than it needed to be. "This doesn't change anything. You're still the one living here, mooching off everyone else." I turned to him slowly, locking eyes. "No, Eric. What it changes is that I don't need this house anymore. I've been building my own business while you've been leaning on Dad to fund your lifestyle. That car you brag about? Paid for with money that isn't even his. Without me, you don't get your resume polished, you don't get your loans covered, and you sure don't get to laugh at me while you live on borrowed time." Eric's face went pale. He muttered something under his breath, but it carried no weight. Finally, Mom spoke. Her voice was quiet, almost pleading. "Tim, you've been keeping all of this from us." "Yes," I said, my voice steady but firm. "Because every time I tried to share something good, you dismissed it. Every time I asked for support, I was mocked. So I stopped sharing, and I started building. And now, I don't need your approval. I don't need your help. I don't need anything from this family." I let the words hang there, heavy, undeniable. Then I stood up. "I'll be moving out soon. I already have enough saved, and once I'm gone, the rent you wanted from me vanishes. The family account you were so eager to fill? Good luck keeping it afloat without me." The shock in their faces was everything I had dreamed of during those sleepless nights. Dad's mask of control shattered completely. Rachel looked betrayed, though she had no right to. Eric sat frozen, his future suddenly less certain. And Mom, she just looked like she realized too late what they had lost. I walked to the door, the same door I had passed through countless times feeling small, diminished, worthless. But this time, I paused with my hand on the knob, turned back, and gave them the final words they would remember long after I was gone. "You wanted to teach me responsibility," I said, my voice steady. "Congratulations. You taught me how to survive without you. And now, you'll have to survive without me." Then I stepped out, closing the door behind me, not as the humiliated son they thought I was, but as the man who had finally taken his life back. And that was the last birthday I ever spent under their roof.